I'm the Dolphin of France. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 376, Saving Angels. After Joseph briefly introduced the properties of benzene to Lavoisier, he immediately turned to Mirabeau and said, "I'm afraid you will be very busy in the next period of time. First, you have to cooperate with Mr. Lavoisier to build a soda ash production plant as soon as possible. Oh, I will let the French Reserve Bank give you a special allocation for this matter. At the same time, you have to build two casein gum factories. One in Paris, with a smaller scale, with a monthly output of about 50,000 kilograms. The other in Brittany, will reach a monthly output of 500,000 kilograms. After that, a beverage factory will be built in Paris, Nancy, Bordeaux, Lyon, and Marseille. Beverages will be bottled in glass bottles for sale. I will send the specific formula directly to the factory." Just now in the carriage, Lavoisier mentioned that baking soda would be produced in the alkali production process, which reminded Joseph. Baking soda plus lemon or vinegar will produce a lot of carbon dioxide. Isn't this the carbonated beverage of the 18th century? In the past, baking soda was expensive and no one could afford it, but after industrial production, it became possible to use it to make high-end beverages. A bottle of water, add a few grams of baking soda, and then add some sugar and juice. This kind of bubbling beverage, that can relieve heat and thirst, and is extremely novel, can even sell for more than high-end wine, as long as it is properly promoted. It's simply a money printing machine. Joseph continued, "The most important thing is to prepare two furniture factories, one in Paris and the other in Brittany. The scale is designed according to the monthly production of more than 10,000 sets of wardrobes, tables and chairs." Mirabeau's flying pen stopped suddenly and looked at the Crown Prince in surprise. "Your Highness, are you saying that you want to build a factory to produce furniture? Excuse me, this may result in losses." "No wonder he questioned it. Furniture in this era is basically the personal art of carpenters. People who need furniture will go to carpenters to customize it. Then the carpenter will start from processing the wood boards and spend a month to make a set of furniture for them. What's the point of building a factory with this production model? And it has to produce 10,000 sets of furniture per month. Paris has a total population of more than 600,000, which means that 5 people will change their furniture every year. According to the current French habits, a set of furniture is expected to be passed down for 18 generations. And usually only newlyweds will customize some new furniture. 10,000 sets of furniture per month will never be sold. Joseph smiled slightly. "Please believe me, 10,000 sets of furniture per month is just the beginning, and the scale will expand tenfold in the future. Not only France, I will let the whole of Europe, even the Far East and America, change their furniture. Oh, as for the specific requirements of the furniture factory, I will have someone give it to you later." He didn't plan to make furniture in the way carpenters make artworks. With the standardized synthetic boards, only a small number of designers need to be recruited to design the appearance of the furniture. The rest of the work is to cut the boards and mail them according to the drawings. This kind of work can be done by just hiring some workers who don't know carpentry, and they can be competent after 2 or 3 months of training, and mass production is completely possible. After that, Joseph instructed Mirabeau and Lavoisier on the details of building the factory, and soon it got dark. After the two left, Joseph sent someone to inform Brent, the general manager of Paris Angel Company, to come to his office early tomorrow morning. You know, baking soda can not only be used to make beverages, but also a very good deodorant. Mix baking soda with talcum powder and apply it to the armpits, crotch and other parts that are prone to odor, which can effectively deodorize. The reason why the French perfume industry is so developed is largely because people don't like to take a bath, resulting in too strong body odor. Perfume is needed to cover it. It is common for a French nobleman to spend hundreds of livres on perfume every year. If Paris Angel can produce a cosmetic product that reduces body odor from the source, it will definitely become a strong competitor to perfume. In addition, baking soda can be used to rinse the mouth, and reduce bad breath. It can be imagined that in the future, nobles will use Paris Angel's mouthwash to rinse a few times before going out when attending formal occasions or going on dates. Otherwise it will be disrespectful to others. According to Joseph's plan, Paris Angel will also join the chemical industry chain and set off the next wave of sales. Reims, a city in central and northern France. In the open space outside the rural church in the suburbs of Reims, a handsome young man with long hair, wearing a black short jacket, white tight trousers, and a simple white scarf around his neck, is standing on a broken ox cart and giving an impassioned speech to dozens of farmers in front of him. That's right. The government deceived us. They use lies to keep you stable in order to make you continue to endure the high rents and taxes and the exploitation of the nobles and officials. They said that the privileges of the nobles were abolished, but in fact only the small money such as mill taxes and hunting taxes disappeared, while the most important annual tribute and tithes still exist. The king who sits in the Palace of Versailles, living a luxurious and idle life, tells you that the land will be handed over to you. But I must tell you the truth. The king and his bureaucrats have decided to make you pay the redemption fee of the land output for 30 years. Plus 30 years of annual tribute and tithes. When you have been devastated by heavy labor and can't walk, your eyes are cloudy, and your teeth have fallen out, the land you have cultivated for decades still does not belong to you. The peasants immediately looked at each other and burst into a burst of dissatisfied discussions. After a while, a farmer with thick hands and feet said loudly to the young man on the bullock cart, "My dear sir, what's the use of all this? Whether it's 20 years or 30 years, we can only accept our fate and pay the money." "No, you are wrong." The young man waved his hand vigorously. "In addition to accepting our fate, we can also resist. As long as we unite as one and let those bureaucrats see your anger, they will tremble with fear and withdraw their shameless redemption plan. We have contacted people from dozens of parishes. In 5 days, everyone will gather in front of Reims City Hall and use stones, sticks and even muskets to teach the shameless officials there." His inflammatory tone made the farmers' blood surge, and they immediately pumped their fists along with them in excitement. "Teach them a lesson. We don't want to pay for another 30 years. Follow this master and resist." After the farmers dispersed angrily, a middle-aged man walked out from behind a haystack not far away, handed a glass of water to the young man who was speaking, and said in an exaggerated tone, "Mr. Saint Just, what you said is so good. These farmers will definitely join the revolution led by you. Look, are we going to Zesfield village today?" Saint Just drank a few sips of water, wiped the sweat from his head, and said loudly, "Of course, there are hundreds of French people out there waiting for us to save." Chapter 377 Vendernet's Conspiracy. "You are the true leader of the French revolutionary cause." The middle-aged man tried his best to flatter. "When those cowards are shrinking under the tyrant's power, you are the only one who is still fighting bravely for the French people. This is my eternal career." A look of pride appeared on Saint Just's face. He doesn't have much interest in money or beauty, but he really likes the praise of others. The middle-aged man calmly took out a stack of Bank of France banknotes from his pocket, handed it to him, and whispered, "This is your activity fund." The banknotes were received by the Parliament of the Southern Netherlands from local farmers. They don't like this kind of frivolous money, but the French seem to be very willing to accept it. Saint Just immediately withdrew the money. "Activity funds should be managed by the club. I cannot collect them privately." He gestured to the middle-aged man to get into the carriage with him, and said with a serious expression, "Compared with the funds, where are the muskets promised by the committee? You know, those vultures in the Palace of Versailles that only gnaw at the French people will never be captured without mercy. We must have guns, and preferably cannons, to crush them completely, so that the French people can truly be free." The committee he refers to is the organization sent by the South Netherlands Parliament to incite the French Revolution. The middle-aged man in front of him is one of the 7 core members of this committee, named Yescourt, who is responsible for connecting with Saint Just, an important figure in the French liberal group. The entire committee has more than 210 people in France. In order to reverse the stalemate situation on the Brussels battlefield, Vendernot also spent a lot of money. In addition to manpower, He also provided more than 800,000 livres of funds with the Netherlands, as well as the support of thousands of flintlock muskets. Yescott nodded vigorously. You are right. The tyrant and his minions must be crushed, please. Rest assured that the first batch of 1,000 muskets has passed Cambrai and should arrive in Reims the day after tomorrow. The rest will all arrive within this month. Saint Just's eyes flashed with fiery light, and he immediately discussed the specific implementation process of the riot with Yescott. When the carriage stopped in Zesfield village, farmers immediately gathered from the fields. Other revolutionaries from the club had already made arrangements here before, including secret propaganda and rural mounted police, just waiting for Saint Just to give a speech. Saint Just looked at the people around him excitedly and suddenly thought of something. He turned to Yescott and said in a deep voice, I have always had a question, Mr. Yescott. How did you learn about the land of Versailles? Details of the redemption plan. The latter hesitated for a moment, then immediately forced a smile and said, you know, we have been active in France for many years, so we naturally have our own channels. Is the intelligence reliable? I don't want the people to think I deceived them. We have been revolutionary partners for many years. You can trust me, Yescott said with a determined expression. In fact, the harsh redemption plan in Saint Just's previous speech was only made up by the British under the instruction of Venderne. Palace of Versailles in a salon, attended by more than 100 people. Almost all the nobles were indifferent to the issues in the salon. Instead, they talked in small groups about the recent domestic situation in low voices. Did you hear the news? The peasants of Reims and Lille drove out the village council and then attacked the town hall. Although there haven't been many reports in the newspapers, it has already made a big fuss. It is said that demonstrations and protests broke out in more than 10 cities. Several nobles who were not well informed immediately asked in shock, what are those untouchables going to do? It seems that they are dissatisfied with the land redemption plan and want to use this method to put pressure on the government. These greedy bastards. Your Majesty has agreed to let them own the land. This is a gift that has never been given to them since the creation of the world. However, they only need to pay a small redemption fee, and they are not satisfied. A bloated nobleman in his 50s said fiercely, that's right. Our rights have been abolished, and all the benefits have been given to the untouchables. Instead of being grateful, they still want to cause trouble? According to me, restless guys should be punished. Catch them all and hang them, and they won't be given an acre of land. That's right. Taxation is a reward from His Majesty the King to the nobles, and it should not be abolished. A young nobleman who had remained silent next to him saw that the heat was almost over and immediately intervened. I advise you to accept the facts. In order to appease the troubled farmers, His Majesty has instructed the cabinet to issue a new decree to reduce the redemption period to 5 years. The surrounding nobles suddenly shouted, that is the land granted to us by His Majesty the King. In 5 years, we will not be able to get a cent. How can this be done? My son's tuition and daughter's dowry all depend on that land. Don't talk about tuition fees and dowries. In 5 years we may have to beg for food. Although most of these old nobles have other industries, feudal taxes are definitely one of their important sources of income. They originally thought that the government would let farmers redeem their land for at least 20 to 30 years, so that they would have time to plan for other financial resources. However, if it was only for 5 years, their quality of life would inevitably plummet. Not to mention some rigid-minded people who rely entirely on feudal taxes to live. Once the taxes are gone, they will really have to beg for a living. Someone excitedly waved their fists and shouted, let's go. Let's petition Her Majesty the Queen. Yes, we must not let the untouchables get the land so easily. The young nobleman stopped several people and whispered, His Majesty must have made a decision. Have you forgotten? When the nobles' rights were terminated last time, we also petitioned, but it didn't work. Then, what do you think we should do? We have to defend Lille and Reims City Hall by ourselves and teach the greedy untouchables a lesson with swords. Are there any warriors willing to go with me? Second floor of the Tuileries Palace. In the office of the Industrial Planning Bureau, Fauch bowed his head deeply and said in a low voice, Your Highness, I failed to handle this incident properly. No matter what kind of punishment I receive, I will not complain. Joseph sighed and motioned him to sit down on the chair. Protests broke out in more than a dozen cities on the same day. Someone must have planned this for a long time. You don't have to blame yourself too much. As he was talking, Eamon knocked on the door and came in. The court officials behind him saluted to Joseph and said, "Your Highness, Her Majesty the Queen asks you to return to the Palace of Versailles immediately to attend the temporary cabinet meeting." Joseph nodded and stood up. "Is it about the peasants' unrest?" "Yes, Your Highness. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 378 Crisis is not just danger. Joseph gestured to Fouche. "You can go with me in my carriage." As the Director of National Intelligence, Fouche is not yet a cabinet minister, but this matter will inevitably require the intelligence system to speak at the cabinet meeting. In fact, Fouche reported to Joseph a few days ago that there were unusual activities by liberals in northwest France. However, as soon as Joseph's order for the Intelligence Bureau to investigate and handle the matter arrived in the northwestern provinces, within 2 days farmers' protests and riots broke out. On the speeding carriage, Joseph listened to the latest information brought by Fouche and couldn't help but frown slightly. "You mean, it is the tennis club organization that is instigating this time, and there is support from foreign forces behind them?" He knew that this so-called tennis club was an organization of French radical liberals. It's just that a large number of the backbones of the Jacobins and Girondins in history were obtained by Joseph. In addition, there was no factor of starving to death in the Great Famine, so the liberals have been silent in recent years, but this time they suddenly made such a big move. Joseph also guessed that there might be foreign intervention. Fouche nodded and said, "They have sufficient funds. The rioters in Lille and Reims also have a large number of flintlock guns. According to our investigation, these should be provided by the Parliament of the Southern Netherlands." The Southern Netherlands sent more than 200 people to France to incite trouble. It is inevitable that some of them are good and bad, and more than a dozen of them have been caught by the Intelligence Bureau. After interrogation by the Intelligence Bureau, more than half of them confessed. Joseph's face darkened instantly. Van Dernet was so courageous. He was really not afraid that he would let the guards directly destroy his parliament. Fortunately, Lille and Reims have basically completed police reform this time. The police resisted the bullets of the rioters and dispersed the rioting crowd in just 1 day. Otherwise, there is no telling how much trouble there would be. If this matter happened in those eastern provinces that have not yet implemented police reform, I'm afraid that the army would have to be mobilized and many people would die before it could be resolved. But even with the new police force, we must not take it lightly. Once a riot occurs, it will cause huge damage to the city, even if the situation subsides later. Moreover, farmers in more than a dozen cities were protesting. Although no violence occurred, the impact on order was also very serious. Fouche saw the expression on the Crown Prince's face, sat up straight and said, "Your Highness, please give me another chance. I promise to arrest all the Southern Netherlanders with evil intentions within a month." "Ah, you sure?" "Yes, Your Highness." Fouche said hurriedly, "The intelligence agency has launched operations in the northwestern provinces and has collected a large amount of intelligence. It is even possible to arrest all the people in the tennis club." Joseph briefly asked about his deployment and confirmed that it was not exaggerated. He breathed a sigh of relief. Just as he was about to nod, he suddenly felt something in his heart. If the Intelligence Bureau can quickly catch the people who instigated the trouble, then the riots will be nothing to worry about. In this case, the opportunity in this crisis can be taken advantage of. He tapped his fingers on the armrest of the seat and carefully sorted out the current situation in his mind. Soon, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "Van Dernet, speaking of which, I have to thank you this time." Fudget looked over in surprise. "Your Highness, what did you say?" "Don't touch those people yet." Joseph raised his hand and ordered, "But we must monitor them closely so that we can arrest them at any time." Although Fuzi was surprised. He immediately nodded and said, "Yes, Your Highness." Joseph continued, "In addition, you must find out as soon as possible the channels through which the funds and materials of the southern Netherlands people enter France, obtain absolutely sufficient evidence, and keep a close eye on all the people involved." "Yes, Your Highness." The carriage stopped in front of the gate of the Palace of Versailles, and Joseph quickly came to the cabinet meeting hall. The guards at the door immediately bowed and opened the 2 golden doors for him. All the cabinet ministers were in place, and when Queen Mary saw the crown prince arriving, for some reason, her heart, which had been flustered just now, suddenly felt more at ease. She hurriedly waved to her son and asked him to sit next to her. When Joseph sat down, Archbishop Brian immediately stood up, coughed slightly and said, "You may have heard about the recent peasant riots in Lille, Reims and other northwestern provinces." He bowed slightly to Queen Mary. "Her Majesty the Queen hopes that we will come up with countermeasures to calm the situation as soon as possible." As soon as he finished speaking, most of the cabinet ministers looked at His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. It wasn't that they all expected Joseph to make up his mind, but they subconsciously felt that the Crown Prince might have a way. Queen Mary looked at the scene in front of her with some confusion, and suddenly remembered what her son had said to her before. "You all need the Crown Prince to give you some advice." "Right." Cough. The ministers then noticed that their behavior was very inappropriate. They coughed suddenly and looked away in embarrassment. However, Joseph stood up directly and said to his mother, "Your Majesty, the reason why this riot developed so fast is mainly because there were instigators from the South Netherlands behind it." He immediately summoned Fouche into the hall and introduced the information held by the intelligence bureau to everyone. After Fouche finished speaking, Joseph looked at the crowd and said, "The top priority right now is to get the protesters to leave the city and return home as soon as possible." Archbishop Brian frowned and said, "Your Highness, the root cause of the farmers' dissatisfaction now is that someone spread a rumor that the government wants them to pay 30 years of land income and major rent and taxes before they can redeem the land. Unless we can immediately issue a redemption plan, they will definitely continue to make trouble. People are like this. When there is no hope at all, they will not feel anything if they are oppressed numbly for a lifetime. But once there is hope, people will want more. This is not greed, but they finally realized that they can be a person. A real person, not a feudal livestock that looks like a person. In fact, the reason why Joseph wanted to break the feudal rent and tax system was to increase the population of France by more than 20 million. That's right. Before, only tens of thousands of nobles in France were real French, and the lower class people were unwilling to do anything for this country. Only by letting them get the land and get rid of the feudal shackles, they will realize that they are also French and willing to contribute to the country. Historically, why could France easily pull out 600,000 troops after the revolution and maintain logistical supply? It was because 30 million French people at that time were eager to serve the country and were proud of being French. In addition, land privatization is also an inevitable requirement for the Industrial Revolution. The whole country is owned by feudal lords, and tenants pay rent on the lord's land. Where is the labor force to support industrial development? No matter how many factories you build, you can't produce even a screw if you can't recruit workers. Chapter 379 Expectation Management. Joseph slapped the table hard and said loudly, "That's right. We must come up with a land redemption plan immediately." Brian hurriedly said, "Your Highness, but the plan." Joseph ignored him at all and turned to Queen Mary. "Your Majesty, please rest assured that I will definitely be able to come up with a suitable redemption plan within 10 days. The situation will calm down within a month at most." Queen Mary couldn't help being startled when she heard this. Because of the riot, she hurriedly summoned the cabinet ministers to discuss countermeasures, but the Crown Prince didn't seem to take it seriously at all. However, the land redemption plan has been formulated for nearly half a year, and it has not yet satisfied all parties. Queen Mary looked at her son in disbelief. "Are you really sure?" Joseph thought to himself that there was no such thing originally, but with the South Netherlanders making such a fuss, He was almost certain point, but on the surface, he just said firmly, "Yes, your majesty, I suddenly thought of a very suitable plan. When I was in Luxembourg, Queen Mary looked around at the other cabinet ministers and saw that no one raised any objections. Brian, Baron Bretteville and others originally wanted to say something, but after Joseph gave them a look, they immediately bowed their heads and fell silent. So, is it decided?" Queen Mary looked at everyone again. "The Crown Prince will be responsible for formulating the land redemption plan, and everyone will cooperate with him as much as possible. The meeting is dismissed." The originally grand interim cabinet meeting ended within half an hour. When Joseph came out of the conference hall, Archbishop Brian, Venio and Talleyrand immediately followed him, all looking worried. The three of them looked at each other, and Brian was the first to speak. "Your Highness, you know that the land redemption plan cannot satisfy everyone at all. Only 1/3 of the modification request you gave me last week has been completed." Minister of Agriculture Vernier and also took 2 steps quickly, came forward and whispered, "Your Highness, I think if there are people from the southern Netherlands involved in this matter, then they are probably waiting for us to announce the plan, and then it can take the opportunity to incite dissatisfied people and cause greater trouble." Talleyrand immediately responded, "Your Highness, perhaps we should mobilize the army and go to the northwestern provinces. This is the fastest way to quell the chaos." Joseph glanced at him and shook his head secretly. Deployment of troops would play into Van der Noort's hands. The remaining forces in France are limited. If things get too big, they will have to withdraw overseas troops to maintain order. As he spoke, he arrived at Joseph's palace. He motioned for a few people to sit down and said with a smile, "Please believe that I do have some redemption plans that can work quickly." "It will work quickly?" Brian lowered his head and pondered. "You mean to significantly reduce the redemption fee, appease the troubled farmers, and calm the situation?" "No, on the contrary." Joseph shouted loudly, "Please spread the word in the northwest provinces that the government is planning to limit the redemption year to 50 years. "What?" Joseph ignored the astonished expressions of several people and added, "What needs to be redeemed also includes various rents and taxes on the land for 50 years, and they must be paid in one lump sum." Brian and others' faces turned dark when they heard this. Rumors that a redemption fee of 30 years had to be paid triggered a riot, and His Royal Highness the Crown Prince suddenly increased it to 50 years. "Are you trying to inspire the peasants to destroy the Palace of Versailles?" Talleyrand was the first to react. "Your Highness, do you want to guarantee the interests of the nobles and let them help calm the situation? By the way, I heard that many noble young people have spontaneously gone to Lille and Reims recently, preparing to teach the rioters a lesson. Your Highness's plan will definitely encourage more people to participate." Brian shook his head anxiously. "Your Highness, this will make the situation even more chaotic." Joseph just looked at the Minister of Agriculture calmly. "I have decided. Please just announce it." "This is, Your Highness." When Vergniaud stood up and left, Joseph said to Talleyrand, "Please use your diplomatic skills and spread the news in the Palace of Versailles, saying that the 50-year plan is just Vergniaud's wishful thinking. The cabinet has decided that, in order to quell the riots as soon as possible, limiting the redemption period to 2 years, and there is no need to pay any tax on redemption." Talleyrand's eyes suddenly widened. "Your Highness, the nobles will definitely go crazy like this. I just want them to go crazy." Joseph smiled and nodded. "This is called expectation management. Only by first significantly lowering everyone's expectations and then giving them a slightly better plan will they be likely to accept it." Brian and Talleyrand were startled. Indeed, as His Royal Highness the Crown Prince said, when both nobles and common people were desperate for the vicious redemption plan, the government came up with a compromise plan of 10 to 15 years. Maybe they will all sigh with relief and agree. Brian then thought of another question and looked at Joseph with a frown. "Your Highness, but before that, I'm afraid there will be huge chaos in the country. I mean, the plan you gave both sides is too harsh and will definitely arouse their anger fury." Joseph nodded. "You are right. Therefore, it is time to invite our friends the Southern Netherlands people to appear. Our city of Reims Saint just waved vigorously at the peasants holding flintlock guns behind him and shouted angrily, 50 years. Those vampires just want to suck us dry. Only by taking power away from them will we have a chance to survive. Among the crowd behind him, some liberals immediately shouted, "Let the 3-level meeting decide how to redeem. We will never accept a 50-year redemption policy. Get rid of those greedy officials and restart the 3-level meeting. Constitution. We need a constitution without the king." A few days ago, the riot they instigated was dispersed by the Reims police. I thought it would take some more planning before launching a new round of riots, but I didn't expect that the French government suddenly helped a lot. The terrible policy of redeeming the property within 50 years including rent and taxes immediately aroused the fury of the farmers. They just made a casual call, and farmers from the surrounding countryside immediately gathered here and followed them to start a riot point led by Saint Just and others. Thousands of peasants also chanted slogans such as the Third Estate and drive out corrupt officials, and surged toward the city hall with pitchforks, sticks, and muskets. Just as they rounded Naffa Street and were only 3 blocks away from the city hall, suddenly more than 200 aristocratic young men in hunting attire lined up in 5 neat rows and rushed towards them with fierce looks on their faces. Saint Just was stunned for a moment, but then he linked arms with the farmers on both sides and shouted, "The king's lackeys are coming. Don't be afraid, everyone. We have much more people than them." Chapter 380 Close the net and catch fish. The rioting farmers immediately shouted, "Don't be afraid, everyone. Come on, fight with those nobles. There are many of us. Don't be afraid. Beat them." However, it was the nobles who took the lead in attacking. 2 gunshots of bang bang came from the ranks of the nobles. The noble commander who led him immediately frowned and turned around and shouted, "Who is shooting randomly?" The undercover agent from South Netherland who fired just now hid behind the others and shouted loudly, "We must let @% of the untouchables know how powerful we are. @# They are rioting. Use our swords to defend the city hall. For His Majesty the King. Warriors, teach those untouchables a lesson." Most of the nobles who came here were young people. After such incitement, blood immediately rushed to their heads, and another 20 or 30 people began to shoot with guns. The farmers on the opposite side shrank back in fear at first, but with the encouragement of Saint Just and other liberal leaders, they quickly regained their composure and raised their guns to fight back. The 2 sides were shouting and cursing at both ends of the street nearly 100 steps apart, and kept firing guns at the opposite side. For a while, the noise and gunshots were mixed with gunpowder smoke, and soon enveloped the 2 nearby blocks. However, although their momentum was very large, both sides were composed of rookies who had never been on the battlefield. In addition, the distance was too far, and even after fighting for a long time, few people were shot. At this moment, whistles suddenly sounded around the street, and more than 400 police officers were divided into 2 teams and outflanked the 2 parties in the conflict. Reims has not been very peaceful recently, and the police are on alert almost all the time. However, limited by the communication level of this era, it took them more than an hour to gather enough people to disperse the rioters. The farmers immediately became chaotic. Some people continued to fight under the command of Saint Just and the others. Some had already escaped through the cracks between the surrounding buildings, and more were looking around in panic, not knowing what to do. The nobles, on the other hand, became proud and began to arrogantly say provocative words or curse. Some even remotely commanded the police to intercept the fleeing peasants. When the whole street was in chaos, several men wearing grey coats and extremely low felt hats emerged from the corner, showed their intelligence agency credentials to the police leader, and then pointed towards the nobles. The police immediately turned and ran towards the nobles, and soon surrounded the more than 200 people. Several young nobles stepped forward and pointed fingers at the police. After the police reform, most of the police were civilians. Although they were highly trained, they were still looked down upon by the nobles, and shouted, "Don't stay here. Those rioters are running away. What are you going to do? These are all nobles. The person you want to arrest is over there." The leading security inspector looked at the few people coldly and said in a deep voice, "Did you shoot first just now?" "Yes." A curly-haired noble said proudly, "You police can't deal with those untouchables, so let us teach them a lesson. You were all involved in the firefight just now. That's not a fire union we are protecting." Before the noble finished speaking, he saw the security inspector winking at the surrounding police and gesturing to the nobles in front of him. "Arrest all those who participated in the riot." "Yes, sir." The nobles suddenly panicked. Some yelled, some showed their prominent identities, and most of them argued with the police. "What do you want to do?" "Those untouchables on the other side of the riot. Let me go. I'm here to quell the riot. Let me go. Look, I don't even have a gun." In a short time, about 200 arrogant nobles were restrained by the police and stood in a row lying on the wall facing the street. The police inspector walked past them and said in a cold voice, "Gathering a crowd to shoot citizens in the city of Reims without permission, no matter who you are, this is a riot. As for those without guns, their swords can still kill people, but we stopped them in time." A captain next to him came over and whispered, "Sir, they are all nobles, and some of them have very unusual identities." "Look." The police inspector glared at him. "Can nobles gather in crowds to riot?" "No, can't." "Take them all away." "Yes." The police inspector's pocket contained an order personally signed by the chief of the police department, asking him to arrest all the troublemaking nobles. So at this time he was very stable and did not care about his identity at all. Of course, the chief of the police department received the instruction of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince to arrest the nobles who participated in the riot on such a large scale. When Joseph heard Talleyrand mention that many nobles were incited to go to the northwest provinces to protect the interests of the nobles, he immediately realized that this was a very useful starting point. So he asked Fouch to send people to keep an eye on those nobles and told the police department not to worry and to arrest them as much as possible if there was evidence. Zesfield village. Saint Just loudly encouraged the hundreds of peasants in front of him. "Don't be afraid of those nobles. Most of them can't walk a mile with their guns on their backs. We almost defeated them today, although we didn't rush into the city hall the day before yesterday, but next time we will have more people. We will definitely be able to." From time to time, the peasants followed him and waved their arms or shouted loudly. The crowd was very excited. After these two riots, they were no longer so afraid of the police, and as Mr. Saint just said, more and more people gathered around them. Next time, there should be 2,000 people attacking the city hall together. By then, who would care about a few hundred policemen, especially those peasants who made the most noise and rushed to the front and received subsidies from the Committee of the Southern Netherlands? They were even more eager to fight. Saint Just continued his speech. "In order to avoid being sucked by those nobles for another 50 years, we must unite and use just." As he was full of passion, the parish priest Jolly ran over breathlessly, waved to the farmers and shouted, "Everyone be careful, don't be fooled by the ill-intentioned Southern Netherlands people." Saint Just frowned and looked at him and said, "Priest who sold his soul, do you think your tricks of sowing discord will work?" More than a dozen mounted policemen following Father Jolly finally ran to the gathering field. Not all mounted policemen rode horses. Many rural mounted policemen walked. The leader glanced at Saint Just coldly, jumped onto the stone platform where the latter was speaking, and then took out a letter from his pocket and showed it to the farmers present. "Everyone, take a look. This is a letter from the Southern Netherlands Parliament to your Mr. Saint Just. It says that the Southern Netherlands people will provide money and guns, and Mr. Saint Just will be responsible for inciting the peasants to start riots in French cities. Their excuse is that the government will set a high land redemption fee. Oh, you can come up and see for yourself. There is Mr. Saint Just's signature here." Chapter 381 Liberty Alliance Committee. Saint Just looked at the light piece of paper in the hand of the mounted policeman and could vaguely see his own handwriting on it. His face suddenly turned pale and his heart began to beat against his chest uncontrollably. How did the letter fall into the hands of the French police? Exclamation mark. Did Johnson betray the club? Impossible. He is a student of Mr. Rousseau. The letter was sent to Brussels by Johnson himself. If it hadn't been for him, there could only have been a traitor in the Southern Netherlands Committee. Saint Just glared hard at Yescott, who was standing not far away, then pointed at the mounted police captain and shouted to the surrounding farmers, "They lie, don't be fooled by them." While hundreds of people present were stunned, He suddenly jumped off the stone platform and ran desperately towards the path leading to the outside of the village. The contact person of the Southern Netherlands Committee hesitated for 2 seconds, then rushed towards the mounted policeman and tried to snatch the letter from the latter's hand. The mounted police were not as clumsy as usual. The police reform did not involve the rural mounted police. They were part of the tax system, so most of them were poorly trained. They flexibly avoided Yeskat's attack, and he kicked him on the cuff. Yeskat instantly lost his center of gravity and fell to the ground. The 2 mounted policemen nearby rushed up immediately and held him down. The farmers looked at the scene in front of them in surprise and then turned to look at Saint Just, who had already run away and only a figure was left. Without the mounted police saying anything else, they already understood 89 points in their hearts, and they immediately started talking among themselves. The captain of the mounted police handed the letter to the farmers, and after they circulated it, he took it back and put it in his pocket. In fact, the letter was completely forged. The real letter is still locked in the drawer of the official of the Southern Netherlands Commission. Some of the committee members captured by the intelligence service had seen several of the letters, so Fouch had someone roughly copy it. They then pulled letters from members of France's liberal faction from the postal system and used them to imitate handwriting. And more than half of the dozen mounted policemen were actually agents of the intelligence bureau pretending to be agents. They took the letter, which was full of loopholes, and just waved it in front of Saint Just, who then ran away with a guilty conscience. Of course, if he didn't run, the mountain police wouldn't actually hand him the letter for confrontation, but would arrest him on the spot and take him away. Who among those farmers can tell whether the letter is genuine or not? It doesn't matter, even if Saint Just handled it well, exposed the agent, and managed to escape at the same time. Because the same scene was happening at the same time in more than a dozen places, including Lille and Reims. Among the high-ranking liberals who are making trouble, there will always be those who are not mentally strong enough and run away. As long as someone runs away with a guilty conscience, it is equivalent to admitting the accusation, and the farmers present will become witnesses. In fact, almost all the liberals who instigated the riots felt guilty. The only difference was between running away immediately or continuing to resist and try to incite farmers to fight against the police. The Mountie captain asked his men to lift Yeskat up and then motioned to a man behind him with his hands tied to come forward. Do you know him? The man nodded immediately. His name is Yeskat. He is one of the 7 representatives of the committee. The mounted police captain waved his hand towards the farmers again. Tell them, who are you? My name is Henry Bergwijn. The committee sent me to spread rumors and incite conflicts between farmers and nobles in France, so as to reduce the military pressure on Brussels. The mounted police captain motioned with satisfaction to his men to take him away, and then said to the farmers present, as you can see, you have all been deceived by the Southern Netherlands people, and of course the so-called liberals. They just took advantage of if you go to cause trouble. They won't care at all whether you will be arrested or even killed. There was an immediate commotion among the farmers, and the timid ones had quietly slipped back home. The other 2 farmers whispered nervously and then moved to the mounted police tremblingly. They each took out a few silver coins from their pockets, pointed at Yeskat and muttered, "Master, sir, he said this is the freedom allowance. We really didn't know he was here to incite riots. We handed over all the money and we will never dare to do it again." At the same time, that a large number of members of the Southern Netherlands Committee in Reims, Lille and other places were arrested by the Intelligence Bureau in the cells of the Reims police station. More than 30 aristocratic young people were cursing in a low voice. "These stupid police officers are slandering us as rioters. They didn't dare keep us for too long." There must have been a lot of people in Versailles running around and singing the praises of our heroic deeds. When I leave here, I will teach those untouchables a lesson. They actually want to use the method of threatening the government to defraud the land. We must not let them succeed. It is said to be a prison, but in fact the conditions here are quite good. Every 5 people live in a suite, which has a living room and bathroom, and there are even musical instruments hanging on the wall. The sound of boots came from the corridor between the cells. After a while, a group of prison guards came in escorting 3 handcuffed and depressed looking people. The cell door at the far end was opened. The prison guard roughly threw the 3 people in and said coldly, "I wish you good luck, bastards." The Iron door closed with a bang, and the prison guards turned and left point in the cell opposite. A noble greeted the three people loudly through the small window on the door. "Hey, gentlemen, what great achievements have you come here for?" The three of them glanced at him depressedly, but remained silent. The laughter of the prison guards came from outside the cell. One of them knocked on the cell door with a baton, and said to the three men, "Netherlander, why don't you answer him?" "Oh, are you from the Netherlands?" A noble immediately joined in the fun. "It must be quite difficult to be locked up here, right?" The newly imprisoned people caught a glimpse of the prison guard's threatening eyes through the small window, and had no choice but to turn to the noble and whisper, "We are sent by the committee." "Committee?" Other nobles became more interested. "Is it the River Transportation Committee or the Geological Committee?" "Yes, it's the Freedom Alliance Committee." "Huh? What does that do?" "I've never heard of it." The Dutch spoke with difficulty. "We are in contact with the liberals in France, and trying to incite riots in France. This time the farmers in Reims were besieged the municipal government, because of our call." "Ah, no, instigation." The faces of the nobles in the surrounding cells suddenly turned livid. "Damn it. It's you who are instigating it behind the scenes." "No wonder those untouchables have flintlock guns. It turns out they were provided by the southern Netherlands." "Hashat. Let me out. I want to duel with these guys." However, the prison guards did not give these nobles a chance to duel. On the contrary, they were released 2 days later. Chapter 382 Contradictions and Greater Contradictions. These nobles had all played a walk-on role in the previous street confrontations, so they would not have been detained for too long. More than 30 people came out of the prison in Reims, and their family members and servants who had been waiting for them for a long time immediately gathered around them. Some shouted loudly, some asked for help, and some cried. Then they dragged their prodigal son towards the stop. Going the carriage outside. However, those young nobles all clamored to wait until after the public trial the day after tomorrow, before returning to the Palace of Versailles. Yes, a prison guard told them yesterday that a public trial of the southern Netherlands spies would be held on the 17th of this month. How could they, already filled with righteous indignation in prison, miss this? What followed was another burst of angry rebuke or pleading from family members and servants. The noble young men angrily told them how they had been deceived by spies from the South Netherlands, and were preparing to come to Reims to defend the rights of the nobles, but were accidentally arrested by the police. "How dare they lie to me? I have to watch those guys hang," someone shouted loudly, which immediately caused a burst of agreement. "Yes, I can't just leave with humiliation. I'm going to hit them with rocks like civilians do. I even want to hang them myself." The story that the southern Netherlands sent a large number of spies to incite French peasants to revolt soon spread throughout France, causing an uproar. The newspapers are full of news about this matter, as well as notices of the public trials of spies in Reims, Lille and Paris on the 17th of this month, according to the instructions of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. All news that has nothing to do with the espionage case news. The publication bureau will not approve it for the time being to ensure that public opinion is directed in the same direction. There are many versions of the story of the southern Netherlands spies circulating in the market, describing in vivid detail how the spies planned and how they were eventually discovered and arrested by the heroic intelligence service. Of course, these were also written by novelists organized by the intelligence service, including the literary giant Beaumarchais, who once worked for His Royal Highness the Crown Prince to write the manuscript overnight. The plot is guaranteed to be tightly linked, with endless suspense and reversals, and focuses on depicting the sinister intentions and hateful ugly faces of the southern Netherlands spies to disrupt France. For a time, everyone in the streets was talking about the evil spy. No matter whether they were nobles or civilians, they were all furious and denounced the shamelessness and sinisterness of the southern Netherlands people. The land redemption policy, which caused a stir in the city a while ago, has been temporarily forgotten by people. Most of the peasants who made trouble stayed at home, worried that they would be accused of treason, and no one went to protest. Now, mass protests have been equated with espionage and incitement. Who dares to go now? Come to grief. As for the nobles, when they met and greeted each other, they would first curse each other for being a South Dutchman, or cry that their son had been deceived by spies and was caught by the police in the northwestern provinces. This has almost become a kind of political correctness in Versailles. The entire France's condemnation of the southern Netherlands spies reached its climax on the 17th point in the square outside the Paris High Court. There were 5,000 to 6,000 onlookers gathered. Some nobles even paid tens of livres to buy seats from civilians who had good seats in order to watch from the front point when 40 members of the Southern Netherlands Committee of Free Alliances were taken to the hut in the corner of the square. The crowd of onlookers immediately burst into a tsunami-like roar. Hang these wretches. They are the ones who brought chaos to France. Death penalty. My sister died in the riots in Lille, and it was them who did it. Spies in the Southern Netherlands must go to hell. Declare war on the Southern Netherlands and let them repent with blood. Someone next to him immediately reminded him in a low voice that France had already declared war on the Southern Netherlands rebels and had achieved 2 major victories. The man who shouted to declare war immediately changed his tune and shouted, "Long live His Majesty the King. Crush those rebels." Soon, the public trial began. The officials of the High Court first read out the charges of the dozens of spies one by one, as well as the evidence collected. The Intelligence Bureau successfully completed the task assigned by Joseph this time, and obtained a large amount of evidence that the committee incited the riot. The pile of letters, documents and current account details was more than half a meter thick. Of course, some of them were copied by Fouche, but in this case no one would actually verify the authenticity of the evidence. Amid the roars of the onlookers, a large number of witnesses came on stage one by one, such as farmers who had received subsidies from the committee or French liberals who incited the riots, to testify against the Southern Dutchmen. Standing in the dock. Then the family members of the riot victims showed up, tearfully complaining about the tragedy caused by the spies and asking the judge to severely sentence these spies. The entire trial process lasted from 9 AM to 5 PM, and only about 10 people were tried. Officials of the High Court immediately announced that the trial would continue tomorrow. The crowd surrounded the High Court and cursed angrily for more than half an hour before gradually dispersing. Second floor of the Tuileries Palace. In the Industrial Planning Bureau office, Vigneault was blowing a rainbow fart to Joseph with great excitement. "Your Highness, as you said, the riots in various places disappeared overnight. Some farmers who participated in the riots even went to the police station to surrender. You are truly the embodiment of wisdom and strategy, a person blessed by God." Brian kept nodding his head. When the conflict between two people is so big that they can never reach an agreement, only a bigger conflict can make them forget their previous differences and face the common enemy together. "Your Highness, how did you come up with such a wonderful idea? Your mind always makes me almost crazy with envy." Joseph smiled and signaled them to stop. "You came to me, didn't you just want to talk about this?" The two looked at each other, and Brian said carefully, "Your Highness, the riots in the northwestern provinces have indeed been temporarily quelled, but you know that both peasants and nobles are waiting for the land redemption plan. The Southern Netherlands spy incident will be over sooner or later, and their attention will turn back to this. Although there shouldn't be any more major chaos after the spy incident, people's dissatisfaction will always erupt one day. So, Joseph immediately nodded very seriously. "You are right." Then the day after the public trial officially announced the land redemption plan. Brian paused and said with a bitter face, "Your Highness, but we still don't have a plan that can satisfy everyone." Joseph smiled. "Just follow the revision suggestions I gave you last time and announce it after the revision." "You mean let the farmers redeem the land output for 8 years and the annual tribute method?" "That's right." Chapter 383 Awkward situation. Southern Netherlands. In the southern suburbs of Brussels, the Hanover Expeditionary Forces stationed. "Finally, right here." Carol II confidently knocked on a small town southeast of Brussels on the military map and shouted loudly, "We will form a siege on the French and eventually completely annihilate them. Then we will wave the army go south to support General Blücher." Several officers in front of him looked at each other awkwardly. Finally, an older general spoke carefully, "Marshal, your deployment is perfect. However, the current condition of the soldiers may not be suitable for launching a full-scale counterattack." The other officers immediately nodded. Just half a month ago, Carol II assembled 30,000 troops and a large amount of logistical supplies to launch a thunderous blow against the French army's positions. However, as soon as the Hanoverian army left their station, the French appeared near and tough like ghosts, although there were nearly 4,000 people in the Southern Netherlands National Guard defending Antolfo. They only lasted less than half a day before being completely defeated. It's not that the French army is powerful, but that the Southern Netherlands army there has just been recruited and has been trained for less than 2 months. They will definitely collapse when encountering the regular army. Charles II was so frightened that he hurriedly stopped the offensive on the southern front and mobilized troops to return to Antolfo. If this was lost, the French army would be able to attack Brussels from the north without hindrance. When the main force of Hanover moved north, the Dutch army and the South Netherlands army south of Brussels were immediately attacked by the French, losing to extremely critical villages afterwards. It took Karl II more than 10 days, enduring French artillery bombardment, and at the cost of more than 1,000 casualties of soldiers, before he finally recaptured the 2 villages and stabilized the defense line. After all this trouble, the morale of the Hanoverian army was low. Without 2 or 3 months of rest and recuperation, it was impossible to organize a decent attack. But their Lord Marshal wants to launch a full front counterattack at this time. Karl II did not blame the officer who raised the objection. Instead, he looked around at everyone with a smile and said proudly, "If nothing happens, the French will transfer a large number of troops back to the country in at most half a month. We must prepare in advance for such a good opportunity." Ignoring the surprised looks of the officers, he pointed at the map again. "Now I will arrange operations to support the Prussian army." As soon as he said this, he heard the attendant's voice coming from the door. "Master Marshal, Speaker Van Dernet is here." The smile on Karl II's face suddenly became brighter and he waved. "Come in, Mr. Speaker. My generals need good news from him." Yes, Van Dernet had informed him about the riots caused by the Committee of Free Alliances in France, and it was for this reason that he began to prepare to counterattack the French army. Moreover, he also learned from his own intelligence channels that the people of the southern Netherlands were doing a good job, and that the French royal family had been devastated by the riots in the northwest provinces. Van Dernet came here at this time, most likely to tell him the good news that the French had decided to transfer the frontline troops back to the country. As the door of the strategic conference room was pushed open, Van Dernet hurried in. Just as he was about to say something, he saw a room full of senior Hanover officers. He paused for a moment, bowed to Karl II, caressed his chest, and said hesitantly, "Master Marshal, I have something I want to talk to you about alone." "Oh, there is nothing I can't say to my loyal subordinates." Karl II smiled and showed his hands to the officers, "And I have already told them the situation." "Ah, do you know the situation?" Van Dernet was surprised. Karl II saw that he looked wrong and hesitated and said, "What do you mean by situation?" Van Dernet was already very anxious, so he immediately took a step forward and said in a deep voice, "Our people were arrested in large numbers in France, and the French held a public trial of them, and the rioting peasants went to watch the trial. In short, our plan failed." "What? Failed?" Karl II grabbed his arms and shouted loudly, "Didn't you say that the action is foolproof and the French will retreat within half a month?" He was very clear about the situation of his troops. If the French army did not return to the country, his counterattack would be fatal. Van Dernet nodded nervously. "I swear to God, we have indeed made adequate preparations. Who knows why it turned out like this? In fact, it's not that he didn't plan carefully. It can only be said that he lacked understanding of France's new police system and still acted according to the capabilities of the old police. Without police reform, the peasants of Reims, led by a large number of South Netherlands revolutionaries and armed with thousands of flintlock muskets, would have destroyed the town hall in the first riot. The riots will then spread rapidly, and the entire province will fall into chaos. The situation in Lille and other places will be roughly the same. Coupled with the crossfire between the young nobles, who were incited to protect the interests of the nobility and the rioting peasants, the chaos would even sweep half of France. Van Dernet sent more than 200 revolutionary elites and invested a lot of money, so he must have enough confidence to inflict pain on France. However, his men encountered Joseph's new style police. More than 500 police officers in the city of Reims bravely withstood the rioters' rocks and bullets, marched into the rioters in formation, separated the rioters into several groups, and dispersed them with explosion-proof waste forks. In the first two riots in Reims, more than 70 policemen were killed or wounded. But the perfect police training mechanism enabled the Reims Police Department to immediately recruit hundreds of police academy students for supplementary work, and maintained the highest level of alert for more than half a month. This sense of responsibility for public security, loyalty to the government, and high morale, let alone the old-style police, even some armies cannot compare with them. It was the excellent performance of the police in the northwestern provinces that a huge storm was eliminated invisibly. It can be said that similar situations, whether in Austria or Prussia, would cause 10 or 100 times more damage than in France. Carroll II repeatedly confirmed with Van der not unwillingly, and after the latter gave more details, he finally waved to the officers in the conference room with a grim face. "Go out. Oh, and don't mention what you just heard to anyone." Yes, Marshal, Paris. The day after the public trial of the Southern Netherlands spy, Joseph received a report from the diplomatic department saying that the British Foreign Secretary requested to postpone the meeting originally scheduled for the day after tomorrow for 5 days. Joseph looked at the documents in his hand and couldn't help but smile. He needs to spend some time thinking about how to deal with the current embarrassing situation. Chapter 384 Farmers. Joseph knew that the British also wanted to observe what kind of reaction the land redemption plan just announced in France would cause, trying to find leverage from it. However, he had made adequate preparations for this, so how could he leave an opportunity for the British to take advantage of him? Eamon knocked on the door and entered, stroking his chest and saying, "Your Highness, the carriage is ready." Joseph nodded, went downstairs and got into the carriage, speeding towards Versailles. If nothing else, those old nobles should be in mourning now, and he must go there as soon as possible to stabilize the situation. Lance. Zesfield village. The small church in the village was packed with people, and there were more people queuing with their heads down outside. Even when the church in Reims City held a large mass here before, it had never been so crowded. Father Jolly rubbed his shoulders tiredly and said in a gentle voice to the 7 farmers, who were kneeling in confession in front of them, "Okay, you have repented to God devoutly, and your sins will be forgiven. Now you all get up. Mr. Merry, please invite the people behind you to come in." The farmers kneeling on the ground still stubbornly shouted, "No, please let me stay a little longer. My sin is so great. I was seduced by those foreign spies and participated in the damn riot. Oh, I even cursed the king. What a bastard I am, Your Majesty the king. It is so great, it is." His poor vocabulary could not express his mood at all. He just repeated "great and long live the king" over and over again. The people beside him also said similar words and prostrated themselves on the ground with all their strength, as if His Majesty the king was right in front of them. Yes, after learning about the land redemption plan officially announced by the government, farmers all over France were boiling. No, it was more than boiling. It was burning with joy, shock, gratitude and a new life, burning all over village. The redemption plan stipulates that all French people can obtain a piece of cultivated land of no more than 30 acres with a fee equivalent to 8 years of land output and annual tribute. This amount can be paid yearly and does not have to be paid in one lump sum. Moreover, the government will also provide subsidies for the redemption costs, based on the time it takes to cultivate the land. In the past, when the yield was high during farming, subsidies could also be obtained. Generally speaking, if a tenant farmer who has cultivated a certain piece of land for more than 20 years has a yield per mu that exceeds 30% of the average level of the surrounding land, the government will subsidize an amount equivalent to 30% of the redemption fee. In addition, families that purchase no more than 30 acres of land per capita can obtain loans from the French Bank of Agriculture after approval by the parish church. In order to facilitate the land redemption, Joseph took the lead in investing in the French Reserve Bank and attracted a large amount of local government funds. established this bank mainly facing agricultural affairs. The interest on this loan was so low that any sharecropping family could make the first payment for their land and gain immediate access to farmland. Point of course, this loan will not be disbursed to farmers, but will be used directly to pay redemption fees on schedule. The loan repayment period can be extended to 15 years. Farmers do not have to worry about redemption money. As long as they cultivate their land well in the future, they will basically have no financial pressure. Point as for the purchase of more than 30 acres per capita, a 20% handling fee will be levied. Point after exceeding 100 acres per capita, not only the handling fee will increase to 33%, but also half of the entire redemption amount must be paid in cash at one time, and must be paid within 4 years. These redemption conditions are simply several times better than the best case scenario imagined by farmers before, especially under the influence of rumors that the redemption period was 50 years and had to be paid in one lump sum. The farmers simply felt that His Majesty the King was as kind and loving as God. They are not afraid of hard work. As long as they can see hope and live a life without being overwhelmed by the high ransom money, they are very satisfied. But now, it only takes 8 years for them to have their own land like the noble lords before. All of this is granted to everyone by His Majesty the Great King, the benevolent savior Louis XVI. Those farmers who participated in the riots before did not need others to criticize them. Their own conscience would make them miserable. So, they came to the church collectively in an attempt to alleviate the sins of their souls with God. Father Jolly reluctantly dragged the farmers in front of him up one by one, which almost exhausted his energy as he was over 50 years old. After breathing for a while, he kindly comforted these 10 people. Even God has forgiven you, and His Majesty the Merciful King will certainly not blame you again. If you want to wash away the guilt in your heart, then come to the church from time to time and pray devoutly for His Majesty the King. The farmers immediately nodded vigorously. You are right. I will come and pray for His Majesty every day from now on. I will come every day too. I will always be loyal to your Majesty. And when they were pushed out of the confessional by Mr. Merry, the 7 people who had been waiting for a long time immediately crowded in. In order to improve efficiency, Father Jolly could only use the single confessional in this way. The peasants who walked out of the confessional heard someone speaking outside the church, and enthusiastic neighbors told them that it was people who had been deceived by Saint Just. Venting their anger, the peasants were furious when they heard this. It was all because of Saint Just, who looked so righteous, but lied to everyone that the government was going to implement a 50-year redemption plan, and incited everyone to make trouble. It was so hateful and despicable. Several people came to the speaker curiously and listened to him denouncing the harm of liberals to France. A peasant asked the person next to him in confusion, "What is a liberal?" A peasant who had seen some of the world explained for him, "Oh, I heard from Baron Guy that people like Saint Just are called liberals. They are bent on overthrowing His Majesty the King. These bastards. Whoever dares to disrespect His Majesty the King, I will never forgive him." That's right. When I see those so-called liberal guys in the future, I will report to the mounted police. What? Liberals? They don't bring freedom at all, but lies and deception. Joseph didn't expect that after this incident, the radical liberals in France would become rats crossing the street. At least among the peasant class, they no longer have any market. Soon, the peasants' topic turned to Dutch spies. These shameless guys, someone said bitterly, may God punish them. My relatives in the city told me that more than 130 spies who were caught were all sentenced to death by hanging. Great. They deserve it. I heard that His Majesty the King is fighting with the Dutch. Really? Then I have to let my second son go to the army. I'll let my son go too. Humph. I have 5 sons. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 385, The Inexperienced Crown Prince. Palace of Versailles in front of the Petit Trianon. Thousands of nobles looked at the balcony of Queen Mary's tea room on the second floor and cried out sadly from time to time, "Your Majesty, are you going to abandon us? Please. Take a look at your loyal servants. They are begging for a little mercy from you, Your Majesty. We just need the most humble traditional income that has not changed for hundreds of years. Your Majesty, please have mercy." Since the official announcement of the land redemption plan yesterday, these nobles took less than a day to complete the connection and started a massive petition. Point behind these more than 1,000 petitioning nobles, there are more eyes staring here. Once Her Majesty the Queen shows signs of loosening her attitude, they will immediately come to reinforce point they can be so united, because the redemption plan really touches their interests. According to the plan, the cost of the farmers' redemption of 8 years of annual tribute will be paid to the original lord of the land point, although this was much better than the 2-year redemption plan that had been rumored before. And those nobles with other income sources reluctantly accepted it. Many poor nobles still began to worry about their source of livelihood. Point in Queen Mary's reception room, there were several nobles of noble status who complained to her pitifully. Even the king's brother, the Count of Artois, was among them. Point Queen Mary kept comforting them, but was finally pestered by them and signaled to her maid Bernac, whispering, "Please go find the prince. Oh, don't let him come here. Go to the study and wait for me." She guessed that it was probably because her son was eager to quell the riots, that he was too biased towards the peasants in the redemption plan, which aroused the criticism of the nobles. She needed to discuss this plan with her son first, and then find a way to compensate the nobles. It is normal for young people to make mistakes when doing things, otherwise what else can parents do? Now it's time for me to help my son clean up the mess. Countess de Bernac had just left the reception room for more than 10 minutes when she returned and whispered in the Queen's ear, "Your Majesty, His Royal Highness the Dauphin is back." The carriage slowly stopped in the marble courtyard. As soon as Joseph opened the door, he heard the noise of waves coming from the direction of the Petit Trianon Palace. Point he just smiled indifferently. This situation was expected long ago. It would be abnormal if the nobles did not make a fuss. Mirabeau, who had been looking forward to it for a long time, immediately came up to greet him. Behind him, there was a monk in black robes, about 50 years old, who was the Archbishop of Paris, Beaumont. Point the two saluted Joseph one after another, and then followed his footsteps, and walked towards the direction of the Petit Trianon Palace. "Ah, you ready?" Joseph looked sideways at Mirabeau. "Yes, Your Highness. Make sure everything is foolproof." "You did a great job." Joseph nodded and asked, "How many people came from the families of the more than 300 prodigal sons?" At least one person from each family was present. Among them was an influential person like Count Orns. "Well, that puts my mind at ease." Joseph turned to Archbishop Beaumont again. "Thank you for coming all the way here in person." The latter waved his hand with a smile on his face. "I will take your instructions seriously. Moreover, the things you said are also what the church should do to get the old nobles to accept the land redemption plan. It is definitely not enough to rely on the pressure of the royal family alone, and it is even more impossible to support them with national finances." Joseph knew very well that to play politics, he had to get as many of his own people as possible. Point his most solid political team was undoubtedly the capitalist aristocracy. So as early as when he just came back from Luxembourg, he instructed Mirabeau to secretly contact important figures of the capitalist aristocracy to prepare to support the land redemption plan. Point moreover, according to his arrangement, the redemption plan was originally very beneficial to big capital. Mirabeau casually called for a meeting and immediately responded in large numbers. As for the church, Joseph had not touched the church's cake in order to reduce the resistance of the land policy, so this time facing the pressure of the old nobles, the church naturally had to contribute. Point similarly, he would not let the church work in vain. Point, if you want others to work hard, it is undoubtedly the most effective to drive them with interests. The three of them talked in a low voice and soon came to the open space in front of the vegetable garden of the Petit Trianon Palace. Point of course, this place was not empty at all at this time, and even some nobles who came to petition were squeezed and stepped on the vegetables of Her Majesty the Queen. Point the nobles immediately noticed Joseph and his party, and someone immediately shouted to him, "Your Highness, please help us persuade Her Majesty the Queen to Revise the land redemption policy. Joseph pushed through the crowd and quickly came to the stone steps in front of the main entrance of the Petit Trianon Palace, smiling at those people. In fact, this land redemption plan was formulated by me. I don't think there is anything that needs to be revised. Queen Mary just walked to the balcony and heard her son's words from below and immediately thought it was not good. Joseph was still too inexperienced for such things that caused dissatisfaction among the nobles. He should first put the responsibility on Brian and others so that he could mediate on the side. It seems that I have to come forward and help him make up for it. As expected, the petitioning nobles immediately caused a commotion. Immediately, someone turned the spearhead to Joseph. Your Highness, the nobility is the foundation of France. You can't abandon us like this. You are so unfair to us. Joseph looked around at everyone, still smiling. No, I always follow His Majesty the King's teachings and never forget you. A nobleman said loudly, Your Highness, your redemption plan will make our lives miserable. Of course not. Joseph said in the direction of the man. In fact, you will be richer than before. The noise of the nobles became a little louder, and the crown prince simply insulted everyone's intelligence. The annual tribute will be cut off after 8 years. How can we become richer? Joseph said calmly, don't just focus on the land itself. It won't bring much profit. You need to look further afield. Once farmers get farmland, they will cultivate it more diligently than before and produce more. Farmers want to increase production, but they don't have enough livestock and fertilizers, and they can't afford to repair water conservancy. Oh, you should know that a common steam pump costs 6,000 livres. Also, advanced farming techniques are very difficult to master and require someone to teach them. The food grown also needs to be transported to big cities for sale. Even if farmers know that the price of food in Lyon is 40% higher than in Tours, they cannot afford to transport the food. He paused to let the nobles digest what he just said, and then continued. So, someone needs to help them do this. Of course, this cannot be done by 1 or 2 people, but requires a company, a large-scale company. Chapter 386 Chips and Investment. Joseph waved his hand very impressively. Start by instructing farmers how to farm more efficiently. Provide them with livestock, seeds, farm tools, and fertilizers. You can imagine how many farmers there are in the country, and how big a deal this will be. At the same time, the company can also organize craftsmen to build water conservancy and rent irrigation machinery for farmers. Don't worry about money. The Agricultural Bank of China will gather a large number of farmers and sign collective loan agreements with them. When the grain harvest is good, the company will purchase the surplus grain from farmers and transport it to more favorable markets on a large scale. The huge transportation volume will greatly reduce transportation costs. Nowadays, many big cities have built wooden tracks, which will make transportation cheaper. I call it agricultural services consulting. Compared with collecting the small annual tribute that farmers are reluctant to pay, such a company will gain greater benefits. The nobles present obviously did not expect to be able to operate in this way, and they immediately started talking among themselves. The members of the capital aristocracy that Mirabeau had already placed in the crowd immediately acted as commentators, making the surrounding old aristocrats nod their heads. However, someone soon raised questions. Your Highness, although the company you mentioned has excellent prospects, it will also require a huge investment, which is simply not something we can afford. You are right. Joseph shouted loudly. So, His Majesty the King established a King's Fund to cooperate with the French Agricultural Bank and specialize in investing in agricultural service consulting companies. He opened his arms to the nobles present, and you, as long as you spend some money to subscribe for the fund, you can enjoy the continuous dividends. Of course, you can also raise your own funds and set up an independent company. As for farming technology and publicity to farmers, the church will provide support to each company. Archbishop Beaumont on the side immediately touched his chest and signaled, the church will fully cooperate. Joseph continued. In terms of water conservancy, the King's Fund signed a large-scale purchase agreement with the steam engine company to obtain pumps, mill drivers and other equipment at the lowest price. In terms of sales, the strategic grain depot will sign a supply agreement with the King's Fund, and even part of the freight can be paid in advance. I can assure you that the income will definitely be several times or even 10 times greater than your annual tribute. The eyes of the nobles in front of the little Trianon palace suddenly lit up. This is definitely a good business. In the past, annual tribute could only be collected from tenant farmers, but this agricultural service consulting company can even earn money from own farmers. Moreover, with the King's Fund in the church responsible for managing the company, I can still live in the Palace of Versailles as before and not have to worry about anything. Just get dividends every year immediately. Servants who had been prepared took stacks of fund subscription applications and distributed them to the nobles. Joseph continued, in addition to the generous dividends, you will no longer have to be looked down upon by those farmers, and you will no longer be called a vampire by them behind your back. There will no longer be liberals pointing fingers at your lives and saying anything extravagant, degenerate and so on. You will make your money through business, and you spend every penny wisely. Now, even more nobles were moved. Although these nobles cling to feudal privileges for their own benefit, in this era, when Enlightenment ideas are affecting all of Europe, they subconsciously feel that they are parasites and mistakes left over by history. Now that there is an opportunity to rely on business, to allow the whole family to continue to live a good life, they are naturally happy to participate. When they looked down at the King's Fund subscription application form in their hands, they saw that the lowest level only cost 200 livres, and they felt relieved. Most of these nobles are not wealthy, and maintaining the dignity of the nobles requires a lot of expenses. Many people are worried that they really can't afford it if they cost several thousand livres. After carefully reading the agricultural service consulting company operation instructions distributed with the application, many nobles wrote down the subscription amount on the application and then stamped their personal seals. Joseph watched people continue to gather towards the fund staff with a smile on his lips, who said that benefits must be provided to the nobles in order for them to accept the land redemption plan. Not only will he not be able to take out the benefits, but he will also receive a startup fund for agricultural reform from the nobles. As for whether this kind of agricultural service company will harm the interests of farmers when it grows bigger, non-existent. Not to mention that the vast majority of nobles are just waiting for dividends and will not be involved in company operations at all. It is equivalent to all agricultural service companies being controlled by the royal family. Even if there are nobles who raise funds themselves and establish companies, they must be under the framework of the King's Fund to function properly. Whether it's the church stalling for a few weeks on your composting, breeding, or the like, or a strategic grain depot refusing to accept your grain, you can get private companies to do their bidding in no time. Even in the worst case scenario, Joseph can set maximum and minimum purchase prices through legislation to protect farmers' basic livelihood. Of course, the little money these old nobles invested in the King's Fund alone was not enough to initiate nationwide agricultural reforms. Joseph glanced towards Mirabeau and others without leaving any trace, and several of the most influential capital aristocrats immediately bowed respectfully in response. The bulk of the King's Fund was raised by nearly 100 capital aristocrats, and with the Agricultural Bank of China replenishing the funds, there was no shortage of funds even without the subscription of the old aristocrats. A nobleman beside Mirabeau tilted his head with a happy expression and whispered, "Honoré, how big a manor do you plan to build this time?" 1,000 hectares. Haha, not that much. Mirabeau smiled and waved his hand. What about you, my dear Francis? About 1,000 hectares. I only have enough money to buy this much. I heard that Viscount de Lascaux plans to buy 5,000 hectares, and he mortgaged his tannery for this. That's really a big deal. Mirabeau nodded, but it's worth investing in the manor now. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince's agricultural reform will soon begin, and this area has broad prospects. This is why the capital nobles are willing to invest heavily in the King's Fund. In the land redemption plan formulated by Joseph, The provision that per capita purchase of more than 100 acres of land will receive high handling fees and require half of the fees to be paid in one lump sum is actually the biggest benefit to the capital group. The high cost basically discouraged ordinary people from buying large amounts of land with loans. The old nobles lost their feudal rent and taxes and dared not invest large sums at will. Only the capital nobles could take over hundreds of hectares of large estates. Joseph knew very well that in this special era at the end of the 18th century, large-scale land annexation was beneficial to the development of industry. And this could just be used as a bargaining chip to exchange the investment enthusiasm of the capital nobles. Chapter 387 Industrialized farms go online. In this era, the industrialized large farm model can rapidly promote the development of agricultural production technology. For farmers, although they will take good care of their own land, due to lack of funds and technology, they are simply unable to improve agricultural technology. At the same time, small farmers are also very conservative. Joseph remembered that French farmers in the 19th century still maintained ancient farming habits and liked to use the simplest and cheapest farm tools. At the same time, they resolutely resisted planting cash crops. After all, only when the granary is full of food can the family feel at ease. And the large farms with capital blessing are not for food and clothing at all, but for higher profits. With the pressure of profit rate, they must constantly upgrade new agricultural machinery, develop more advanced planting technology, try more expensive but better new fertilizers, and plant crops with higher economic value. This will greatly promote the development of agriculture and industry in France. Yes, farming is also the basis for the development of industry. The simplest point is that the British textile industry relies on a large amount of self-produced wool and South Asian cotton to be able to look down on the world. If France wants to challenge Britain in the textile industry, it must first have enough cotton production. If all farmers grow grain and rely on imported cotton, it will be difficult to approach Britain in terms of cost. In addition, France also needs to plant a large number of mulberry trees in its traditional advantage field in the textile industry, silk. These are the most suitable projects for large-scale industrial farms. Mirabeau and his group have a keen sense of what can make money. The Crown Prince gave them a little advice, and they immediately realized the broad money prospects of the new manor in the future. Coupled with the benefits of the land purchase system, they immediately decided to invest a large amount of money to enter the market of industrial manors. Of course, the reason why Joseph wanted to vigorously develop agricultural service consulting companies was to use a unified management model to gather scattered small farmers together so that they could have the competitiveness of large farms to a certain extent. Seeing that Viscount Dick was still excitedly talking about the bright future of the new manor, Mirabeau just smiled and dealt with it. What he was thinking about at this time was what His Royal Highness the Crown Prince said to him a few days ago. His Highness mentioned that after the industrialized farms were put into operation, the land that originally required 300 or 400 people to cultivate, after the extensive use of livestock, machinery and new agricultural tools, and the implementation of strict standardized management, may only need less than 100 workers to manage it in an orderly manner. He quickly thought, where will the remaining 200 or 300 people go? There is only one answer, that is, they can only go to big cities to make a living. In addition, with the help of agricultural service consulting companies, ordinary peasant families no longer need all family members to participate in farming to ensure the output of the land. In the case that it is difficult to purchase more than 30 mu of land per person, idle family members will also go to the city to make money. After these people flock to the city, the factor is manpower will become extremely abundant, and one of the biggest factors restricting the expansion of the factory will disappear, and these people living in the city have to buy all the necessities of life. That is, they will bring a huge consumer market. After foreseeing this, Mirabeau calculated again and again, and found that investing in large farms at this time is not as profitable as laying out industries such as textiles and steel that require a lot of manpower in advance. So, he just bought some land suitable for investment, ready to sell it as soon as it appreciated. Most of the funds in his hands were bet on the automatic loom factory in Lyon, and a small part was invested in the coal mine in the southern Netherlands. The latter was actually invested on the advice of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Although the place is still in the midst of war, he believes more in His Royal Highness's vision. In fact, Mirabeau still Mr. Joseph thought that there would be speculation in land half a year ago. He had experienced the real estate craze in the early 21st century and was familiar with the tricks of major companies and speculating in land, so he buried mines in the Food Production Act early. On point as long as it is designated as arable land by the government, the buyer must immediately fulfill the obligation to achieve a certain amount of production after obtaining its ownership. Even if the land is sold, if the minimum production is not achieved during the harvest season, all landholders will be jointly and severally liable in this sowing season. Of course, this does not include the situation of encountering disasters, so Mr. Mirabeau will find that he will have to sow the land immediately after buying it, otherwise he will face a fine until the land is forcibly auctioned by the High Court, while the capitalist nobles are thinking about how to maximize their investment. Nearly half of the petitioners in front of the Petit Trianon Palace are still tense, and some have even crumpled the King's Fund application form in their hands and thrown it on the ground. They are the year-light tribe among the nobles. Perhaps it is because of the small amount of land and the limited annual tribute they receive, or perhaps it is because their own life is too grand, so that they can't make ends meet. In short, they have no spare money at all. There are even many people who rely on borrowing to make a living, maintaining dresses for various occasions, paying for the living expenses of illegitimate children, participating in routine salons, hunting or gambling, all require a lot of silver coins. And these are the basic element of life for the nobles of the Palace of Versailles. They have no money to invest in the King's Fund, which means that they will starve to death after 8 years without a source of income. Soon, a tall aristocrat with obviously poorly maintained curly hair took a few steps forward against the crowd of people subscribing to the fund, and loudly said to the Crown Prince on the steps, "Your Highness, land tax is the traditional right of the nobles. It is the honor bestowed by the old king to our ancestors. You cannot abolish it so easily." Echoes immediately came from the surroundings. "Yes, we want traditional rights, not funds. I inherited those 9 gong from my father, and it deserves to be respected." Joseph just looked at these people indifferently. He had expected this to happen, and had already made plans. These nobles who do not subscribe to the King's Fund are the poorest group, so their influence is also the weakest, but we must also take into account the damage they may cause to the country when they live in poverty. It was in this situation that the civil servant named Lee from Danfang directly overturned an empire. Joseph coughed lightly, looked sharply at the tall noble who jumped out first, and said coldly, "Perhaps you remember how your ancestors obtained their fiefdoms." The latter was a little stunned by the sudden question. Yes. Joseph pointed at him forcefully. It was they who followed the king's army and used their extraordinary bravery and fearlessness on the battlefield to win their own glory. Chapter 388 Queen Mary's peace of mind and comfort. As he spoke, Joseph looked around at the nobles, who still had dissatisfied expressions on their faces, and continued to speak loudly, but their descendants only know how to lie on their share of glory, covet enjoyment, do nothing, and even serve. The poor peasants will not hesitate to go against the wishes of His Majesty the King and affect the future of France by getting a little bit of tax in their hands. In this era, enlightened autocracy has become the consensus of European aristocrats. At the same time, Enlightenment thought also had a profound influence, so he said, affecting the future of France. Even if the nobles were dissatisfied, they subconsciously knew that this was right. If your ancestors knew what you said and did here today, they would definitely be ashamed of you. Joseph did not give the nobles a chance to refute, and immediately continued, "If I were you, I would follow the steps of my ancestors and go to the battlefield like a warrior, fighting bloody battles for His Majesty the King and France, to achieve achievements that surpass those of my ancestors, and gained an eye-catching glory. Your eyes will be fixed on the vast European continent, your hearts will be focused on the rise and fall of empires, and you will be fulfilling the obligations entrusted to you by France, to defeat powerful enemies one by one, thereby winning endless wealth and glory. And it's not like you secretly rejoice over the mere few silver coins paid by farmers, or you feel aggrieved like a little girl because you lost that little money. You should let your ancestors be proud of your courage and cheer for your victory. instead of using the name of your ancestors to maintain your empty and insignificant life. Joseph finished speaking in one breath, and the nobles present were stunned on the spot. The education they had received since childhood about the glory of the nobility made their blood boil with excitement, but at the same time they were ashamed. This was Joseph's strategy. For these nobles who were idle, had no income, and were very capable of making troubles, the Prussians had actually already provided a solution. Let all descendants of the nobles who did not inherit the territory join the army, become professional soldiers, and receive rewards based on military merit. These little nobles were extremely poor. In order to earn a fortune, they worked very hard on the battlefield and supported the backbone of the Prussian army. This is where the Junker nobility comes from. Joseph naturally does not want to create a French version of Junker, diluted by a large number of civilian soldiers from the Guards Corps. These nobles could not unite to form an interest group. However, although these nobles are idle on weekdays, they all have a good educational foundation, especially riding, swordsmanship, and shooting, which are all required courses. As long as they are rigorously trained and disciplined, their individual combat capabilities will be stronger than those of civilian soldiers. In addition, there is another point. The French royal family itself is the largest aristocracy, so they cannot give up these old aristocrats casually. At least they are relatively loyal to the king, are most closely tied to the interests of the royal family, and will never seek to overthrow the royal family. If they can be integrated into France and the industrial age, it will actually be very beneficial to the royal family. And Joseph also knew that it was not enough to win blood through speeches alone. If you want a class to work for you in a down-to-earth manner, you must provide them with corresponding benefits. He looked at the reaction at the bottom of the steps and immediately struck a chord. While the iron was hot, you want to obtain a fief according to tradition? That's absolutely fine, as long as you use your blood and sword to make meritorious deeds like your ancestors did, you will receive glory and rewards. France does not have much land, but there is almost endless land overseas. The colonies won by your heroic battles for France will surely have your own fiefdom. Both the area and tax revenue will be 100 times greater, or 1,000 times more than the little territory you inherited before. Come, join the Royal Legion and win your brilliant and glorious future. On the balcony, Queen Mary listened to her son's impassioned speech and watched the eyes of the troubled nobles gradually fill with fanatical light. She was shocked, but also extremely relieved. It turns out that the sun doesn't need to cover for him at all. He stood there like an unshakable tower, and all challenges and difficulties became insignificant in front of him. She smiled happily, ignored the thousands of nobles below, turned back to the house, happily picked up a piece of cheesecake, and put it in her mouth. With Joseph here, maybe I can rest more and enjoy delicious desserts in peace in the future. Southwest corner of the Palace of Versailles under the protection of 4 guards. The British Foreign Secretary, the Marquis Wellesley, glanced gloomily at the door of the peace hall in front of him. He knew that there would be an extremely difficult negotiation waiting for him. Originally he planned to cause riots in France to blackmail the French. Unexpectedly, before his ship arrived at the port of Le Havre, he heard the news that the riots had subsided. But God closed his door and opened a window for him. He learned that the reason why the riots subsided was that the French government promulgated a land redemption policy that was very biased towards farmers. So he confidently asked the French diplomatic department to postpone the meeting, just to wait for the matter to ferment and the angry French nobles to attack the king. Under internal chaos, France was bound to make concessions to Britain. However, the development of things shocked him extremely. The nobles in the Palace of Versailles suddenly stopped fighting, and it was even heard that there was a wave of nobles joining the army. These useless French nobles. He cursed in his heart. If it were the British, they would definitely launch a glorious revolution at this time, making the king beg for mercy. The door of the peace hall opened, and Talleyrand's limping figure appeared. Wellesley quickly stopped his random thoughts and bowed to the cripple, caressing his chest hypocritically. "Nice to meet you, Archbishop Talleyrand." The latter smiled and returned the greeting. "I'm glad to see you too, Marquis Wellesley. I hope we can have a pleasant conversation today." "Oh, it will be as you wish." Wellesley secretly grinded his teeth and followed the lame man into the spacious hall. The corner of his eye glanced at the huge oil painting Louis XV creates peace on the fireplace, and he couldn't help but mutter in his heart, hypocritical French people. The British and French foreign ministers made another polite gesture and sat down on both sides of the long table. The other 7 or 8 diplomats sat at the head of their respective chief officials. After a few seconds of silence, Wellesley breathed a sigh of relief and spoke first. It is said that there have been serious riots in France recently. I hope you have not been too affected. Of course, they were just farmers walking into the city, and they were quickly dispersed by the police. Talleyrand looked at him with a relaxed expression. Oh, by the way, your country seems to have encountered some troubles in India. Oh, you must not have been affected at all. Chapter 389 The Secret War Between Britain and France. Marquis Wellesley was choked, as if there was a lump of mud in his chest. He took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, we have encountered a little challenge in the Far East, but the East India Company has massively increased its troops, and the natives of Mysore will soon be punished. So, you are here to inform me of the good news, that the British army is invincible. Talleyrand made an exaggerated expression. It seems that we have nothing to talk about in the Far East. Oh, congratulations in advance to His Majesty the King of England. Brilliant victory. Wellesley looked at him looking like he didn't deserve a beating and really wanted to just say we'll see and walk away. However, he immediately remembered the £1.7 million of special bonds issued by the British East India Company just last week. This money was specifically used to solve the Mysore problem at the current exchange rate. That was a huge sum of more than 42 million livres. This is only the first batch of bonds. After paying for the salaries of additional soldiers, purchasing weapons, supplies, and assisting Indian allies, it has been almost spent. At least a further £800,000 is likely to be issued next month. You know, the British Royal Navy, at the request of the East India Company, sent 25 warships, loaded with more than 5,000 marines, to South Asia to help resist the Mysore army. These warships and soldiers went to fight tens of thousands of miles away, but they were all gold-eating behemoths. Once the East India Company did not progress smoothly in the war with Mysore, this huge loss would cause the East India Company's stock price to plummet. At the same time, as the Anglo-Indian trade was affected by the war, the East India Company's revenue would also have problems. You know, the East India Company is not just a company, it is also the most important blood transfusion pump of the British Empire, contributing a huge amount of funds to Britain every year. Its profitability will directly determine the British government's fiscal surplus. What's more, the British, especially the upper class of Britain, which included almost all members of Parliament, were basically shareholders of the East India Company. If the East India Company's share price collapsed, the British, whose wallets were hit hard, would be quick to oust the Tories. Even King George III, who strongly supported Peter the Younger, would lose political prestige as a result. Wellesley knew that his mission on this trip was to obtain the best war environment for the East India Company in India, and now he had to endure this dead cripple. He pondered for a moment, with a smile on his face. Dear Archbishop, you know that defeating Mysore is just a matter of investing money. Fortunately, Britain can easily come up with this little money. He leaned forward slightly, looked at Talleyrand and said, the investment in Tunisia is a heavy financial burden for your country. Oh, if I made a mistake in my calculations, please point it out directly. Your country's finances should only be enough to support the situation in North Africa until the end of this year. By the way, I heard that you are preparing to invest in a large-scale iron smelting plant in Luxembourg, which will further, if we squeeze out military spending, we may not be able to survive until the end of the year. I'm really impressed that you are also proficient in finance. Talleyrand looked unconcerned. Fortunately, Tunisia is very close to France, so it doesn't cost much. And how much money did you invest in India this time? £2 million. He smiled and waved his hand. Of course, this is nothing to the East India Company, which is rich and powerful. It is just the domestic tax for only half a year. Note 1. The so-called domestic tax was the revenue paid by the East India Company to the British government. This does not include dividends to shareholders. This shows how amazing the East India Company's ability to make money was. Talleyrand caught the eye of the British Foreign Secretary. You see, the key to the problem is that France can afford to lose North Africa. After all, we didn't invest much money in Tunisia, and we didn't even buy land there many, and can Britain wave goodbye to India as freely as we do? Wellesley immediately paused. The dead cripple is right. Britain can't afford it. That's why he came to Paris. To suffer this cowardice point he tried to keep a smile and pretended to pick up the teacup to drink water, avoiding Talleyrand's gaze. So, there is no need for our two countries to continue to waste money on things that have nothing to do with them, right? He has made it clear that Britain will stop supporting Algiers and Tripoli, France will stop sponsoring Mysore, and everyone will save money and live their own lives. Talleyrand nodded. Your proposal is very useful. So, is it time for the UK to officially recognize our country's interests in the Maghreb countries? The Marquis of Wellesley really wanted to give the lame man a cane. You, France, took advantage of the chaos and grabbed Tunisia. How could you drag in all the Maghreb countries with just one mouth? This also includes Morocco, which is the fucking sphere of influence of our British Empire. This is completely unreasonable. He shook his head. At most, it recognizes France's power in Tunisia. Perhaps it would be good for our country to establish some diplomatic relations with Mysore. In that case, the Royal Navy will block the Strait of Gibraltar at any time. I very much doubt that, while your country is in a state of distress in India, it still has the energy to operate in the Mediterranean. When challenged, the heritage of the British Empire astonishes everyone. Well, that doesn't count Morocco. However, our country wants to obtain trading rights in the Indian Carnatic. Your appetite is too great, and it will be harmful to your health. Archbishop, listen to me. It will be in everyone's interest to let Mysore withdraw and France gain Tunisia. Carnatic is a large state in the southeast of India, dozens of times larger than Pondicherry, the French foothold in India. This will break the British monopoly on Indian trade, and the British will never agree to it. Point of course, Talleyrand was just asking for an exorbitant price. The French fleet was not yet sufficient to maintain trade to the Far East. Then, return Dominica and Antigua to our country. Talleyrand was talking about two small islands in the Caribbean that produce sugar cane. No, you are wrong. Mysore is replaced by Tunisia. This is my bottom line. After a sincere and in-depth exchange of views, the two old foxes ended the meeting in a very harmonious atmosphere without reaching any agreement point. In fact, this is the norm in diplomatic negotiations. Everyone first finds out the opponent's trump card, then goes back to use their own methods, and then talks until one party is unwilling to continue investing. Wellesley left the Palace of Versailles with a sullen expression. In his carriage, he wrote a letter to Lord Thomas, the British envoy to the Maghreb countries, asking him to urge Algiers and Tripoli to put pressure on Tunisia. Then he wrote to Cornwallis, the Governor General of India, asking him to concentrate all his efforts on achieving a great victory, to increase his bargaining chip against the French. Point at the same time, in the Prince's Palace, Talleyrand also reported the contents of the talks to Joseph. Note 1. Talleyrand used an exaggeration here. In fact, at the end of the 18th century, the domestic taxes returned by the East India Company to the UK were approximately more than £3 million per year. Chapter 390. The Maori with a harmonious relationship. Joseph raised his eyebrows. Oh, are the British so tough? Yes, Your Highness. Talleyrand nodded. Perhaps we should increase our investment in Mysore and let the British suffer more, so that they will return to the negotiation table again. The bottom line for the negotiation given by Joseph to him was that Britain recognized France's influence in Algiers, Tunisia and Tripoli. Algiers is an important grain producing area, with an area several times that of Tunisia, and is the largest piece of fat in North Africa. And Tripoli is close to Egypt, which is an important foundation for opening the Suez Canal in the future. Historically, Emperor Napoleon had briefly set foot in Egypt. Because the foundation in North Africa was not solid, and the navy was weak, and eventually lost the opportunity to threaten Britain with the opening of the Suez Canal. Of course, if the Caribbean islands can be obtained, Tripoli can be temporarily put aside. Today's white sugar is a luxury, and the value of the Caribbean islands that can produce a large amount of sugar cane is also very large. Joseph thought for a moment, but waved his hand and said, "No, Archbishop Talleyrand, we need to shrink our actions in India. Why, Joseph smiled and said, our goal is not to drive the British out of India, not to mention that Britain will definitely fight with France for India. After losing Britain's containment, it is not in France's interest for Mysore to conquer the entire Indian peninsula. Mysore has been exposed to European technology, plus the personal ability of Tiger of Mysore Tipu Sultan. This is very likely point the powerful Indian Empire will inevitably go north and get involved in Central Asia, which will bring great trouble to the whole of Europe. Therefore, it is best for India to be scattered like a starry sky as it is now. What we have to do is to make the British pay more costs. Joseph continued, and the cost of attack is much higher than defense. Let Marquis Lafayette arrange defenses as soon as possible. Let the British attack, and at the same time he must destroy Britain's supplies as much as possible. Military expenditures will teach the British a lesson. In fact, there is another important reason for him to do this. Mysore can never beat Britain. After all, Britain is still the world's #1 power. Although Mysore's raid has achieved some results, Britain has now begun to get serious with Mysore's strength. It is easy for the British to seize the opportunity to wipe out the enemy if they continue to attack fiercely. And the step-by-step defense, which greatly consumes Britain's military expenditure, is the most correct tactic for Tipu Sultan. Moreover, Joseph has prepared a secret weapon for him. Calculating the time, those people should have arrived in India now. Joseph then remembered something and told Talleyrand, by the way, according to the British habit, they are likely to create trouble for the southern Netherlands. You need to go to the German countries, as well as the countries in northern and eastern Europe, as soon as possible, to tell their kings, India. Outside the port of Mangalore, northwest of Mysore, a small schooner came quickly. The Russian flag was hoisted on the ship, and the logo on the hull was the Gemini Trading Company. On the deck, several dark-skinned sturdy men with complex facial tattoos on their faces were looking at the Mysore defense forces lined up on the dock to greet them. One of the middle-aged men with a waist as thick as a bucket pointed to the Islamic style buildings in the distance and spoke a string of obscure languages. The young man next to him said in not very proficient French, Uncle Magnus, Mr. Dufresne asked us to speak French as much as possible. Have you forgotten again? Oh, yes. Magnus smiled apologetically and spoke poor French. Those houses are really strange. Even more strange than those built by the development team in the town. But they are beautiful. The development team he mentioned was the colonization team that landed on New Zealand Island with Dufresne. After they were given a piece of land by the Maori, they changed their name to the development team and began to build a town there. With the assistance of a large number of almost free Maori laborers. The Maori had a very harmonious relationship with them and usually worked a day just to drink a few glasses of wine and listen to the stories of the development team members. Although the development team members had finished telling all the stories of breaking the sky and the master of girlfriends in their memory after 2.5 months, and had to rely on their own fabrication to continue the subsequent plots, the Maori still listened with relish. Many Maori also learned French by listening to stories, especially this year, the first batch of wool after the harvest. The Maori people who received their wages were simply ecstatic. The French paid a large number of iron farm tools, horses, beautiful clothes and the like, which are luxury items that can be passed down for generations in any Maori tribe. After hearing the news, those Maori tribes that had not cooperated with the development team before all came to ask to raise sheep for the French, and even took the initiative to reduce their remuneration. Dufresne was very kind and still maintained the previous remuneration because it was already very low and there would not be much to save. So he signed sheep raising agreements with more Maori tribes. After more than half a year of operation, sheep have now appeared in most places in the entire North Island of New Zealand. Now the only factor restricting the number of sheep in New Zealand has become the reproduction rate. As soon as a sheep is born, it will be immediately rushed to be adopted by Maori people and taken care of meticulously. Coupled with New Zealand's lush aquatic plants and a climate that is extremely suitable for sheep growth, the sheep's wool production here is nearly 20% higher than that of its commoners in the UK. On the deck of the boat, another tall young Maori tugged hard on his coat. He was obviously not used to wearing tight clothes all day long, and said to Magnus with some worry, "Magnanu Mr. C, the Pimaki people have been trying to take action recently. If they come to our tribe for revenge and we happen to leave home, the Pimox he was talking about was the South Island of New Zealand. Historically, the North Island often attacked the South Island, but the latter would also gather strength to fight back. Magnus smiled and said, "Don't worry, Nick or Mr. Dufresne is calling on all tribes to sign a common declaration. In the future, conflicts between tribes will be adjudicated by the tribal council." Dufresne had already gone to the South Island before we set off. "I think the Waitaha tribe will also join the joint declaration." Nick Orr was still worried and said, "But what if Waitaha refuses?" "Humph," Magnus said disdainfully, "to reject Mr. Dufresne is to become an enemy of all tribes. Moreover, they will also lose the opportunity to raise sheep." "Nick Orr, do you think they will attack Yamoto again?" "Yamoto is where their tribe lives." When the young man heard they are not allowed to raise sheep, he immediately nodded with confidence. "Then it will definitely not happen." Chapter 391 Secret Weapon from New Zealand. A group of Maoris boarded the pier under the leadership of the leader Fernand Dufresne, and then took a sedan carried by local people to the city of Mangalore Point a few days later north of Mangalore. Here is a forward camp of the Mysore army, stationed with more than 5,000 Mysore soldiers, as well as 100 Tunisian elites brought by Lafayette. Tunisian soldiers are absolutely here. They are of superior quality, and less than 15 kilometers to the north of them is the British defense line set up in southern North Canada Point. After Lafayette inspected the camp as usual, he looked at the British stronghold with some boredom. After his recent repeated reconnaissance, it was basically confirmed that there were only 1,200 British troops and 3,000 to 5,000 Maratha soldiers, the British allies in India Point. Judging from the previous battles, as long as the 12,000 troops concentrated here are fully committed to the attack, it is possible to break through North Canada within a month. However, in the letter, sent from Paris just last week, the Crown Prince asked him to prepare for defense with all his strength, and not to attack on a large scale. At most, he could only disrupt the British supply line. This made him feel as uncomfortable as watching his beloved mistress flirting with him without even a trace, while his hands and feet were tied and unable to move at all. At this moment, his Tunisian staff officer came quickly, raised his hat and saluted him. "General, those Pacific natives are coming." Lafayette nodded and left the camp with more than a dozen officers to greet the Maoris. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince seemed to attach great importance to these natives, so he had to treat them with caution and courtesy. In the northernmost town of Mangalore, Lafayette and Fernand Dufresne greeted each other and said politely, "I have heard about your uncle's deeds. He only led a colonization team of a few hundred people and obtained a colony for His Majesty the King that is about the same size as the United Kingdom. This Fernand is the nephew of Dufresne, the captain of the New Zealand development team." The leader of the Maori team said hurriedly, "If my uncle knew that the great hero who defeated the British in the Far East praised him so much, he would drink happily until he fell drunk," Lafayette said as he looked at the group of dark-skinned Maoris with strange hairstyles behind Fernand, and frowned slightly subconsciously. The black lines tattooed on the face by the natives reminded him unconsciously of ferocious beasts. Ahem. He coughed dryly to cover up his inappropriate expression and said to Fernando, "What exactly are they going to do?" His Royal Highness the Crown Prince said in his letter to me that they have excellent military skills, but to be honest, I think they may not be able to integrate into my army. Magnus, who was standing in the back row, suddenly waved his hand and interrupted. "You are that very powerful general." He looked at Fernand and asked in a low voice, "Is it the word general?" After receiving a positive answer, he loudly said to Lafayette, "Mr. Fernand often talked about you on the ship. Oh, by the way, we are here to help you build power." He gestured to the more than 30 strong Maori men behind him. "We are all experts in repairing the power in the tribe." Lafayette was obviously a little surprised that these natives could speak French, but he quickly noticed a word just mentioned by the Maori, "Pa." "What is that?" Fernand hurriedly explained to him. "It is a kind of Maori simple fortress. Although they look a bit crude, they can indeed play a very good defensive role." After hearing this, Nikor danced and gestured. "We need to first choose a high ground, flatten the top, and then cut some thick tree trunks to surround it. Then build a tall tower in the middle. When The commander of the engineering battalion behind Lafayette heard protect the tower with 3 circles of wooden fence. He finally laughed disdainfully and then said to Lafayette, "General, I think this primitive, let's call it a fortress, can't defend the British army at all. You know, the British don't use spears and bows and arrows. They have cannons and heavy artillery. I think that, if we need to build a defense system, we should also choose bastions." He is an old subordinate brought by Lafayette from France. He is a serious officer who graduated from the engineering major of the Valois Military Academy. He is very familiar with building forts. Lafayette nodded and looked at Fernand. "You see, as Major Gaston said, the bastion is more suitable when dealing with the British. Perhaps your people can help him build it." "Yes, General, the bastion is very effective." Fernand considered the wording, and in the end the adventurer's character made him choose to be straightforward, but Pa is more suitable for the situation in Mysore. "This is the Crown Prince, Your Highness's intention. How is this possible?" Major Gaston waved his hand disdainfully. "You must have misunderstood His Highness." Fernand's eyes turned around. "Mr. Major, how long will it take you to build a bastion?" "It depends on the scale," Gaston said. "In an emergency, a temporary bastion on the front line can be built in only 3 months. Fernand nodded and then gestured to the Maori behind him. Point Magnus immediately said, "If we have enough manpower, it will take 1 month to build a Pa." Fernand continued, "Mr. Major, apart from the speed of construction, there is almost no investment in building Pa. If there is no need to pay the salaries of Indian laborers." Gaston paused. "Tipu Sultan conscripted serfs to work, not to mention wages. Even food had to be provided by the serfs themselves. And building a bastion by yourself would cost at least 30,000 to 40,000 livres, and this was the simplest bastion. If you want it to be strong and durable, the cost would increase tenfold. As for the defensive effect," Fernand looked at the major. "Although the Pa is far inferior to the bastion, it can greatly delay the British offensive. As long as there are enough, this thing will become a nightmare for the British." But Gaston wanted to say something else, but was interrupted by Lafayette. "Okay, let the local officials of Mangalore fully assist Mr. Dufresne. But at important notes, some bastions should also be built." He had received instructions from the French General Staff to cooperate with the Maori to strengthen the defense of Mysore Point. Although he did not believe in the natives' fortress, he saw that Fernando was very persistent, and it was not easy to stop it by force. Point in the days that followed, the British and Mysore sides were busy with their own things. In this boring silence, time passed quickly. Half a month later, when Lafayette saw the first Pa built in the northwest of Mangalore, he couldn't help but widen his eyes in surprise. As an experienced officer, he realized at the first sight of this thing that it was absolutely useful. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 392: Destroy Mysore within 3 months. The entire Pa is built on a mound 70 to 80 meters high. There are 3 circles of walls from bottom to top, and in the middle is a watchtower more than 5 meters high. Each layer of the wall is made of thick tree trunks as pillars. A large number of thinner wooden strips are densely and staggered on the outermost layer, followed by 1.5 meters thick rammed earth wall. Defenders could stand on rammed earth walls and poke their heads out from thick tree trunks to shoot. It is difficult for the attackers' muskets to shoot through those 1/2 meter thick tree trunks at long distances, and if shelling is used, the shells can easily ricochet off the low rammed earth wall below. Note 1. In this way, the attacker must use artillery to blow away all the wood on the upper side of the earthen wall, and then use infantry to get close and charge forward, so that it is possible to break through the first layer of the wall. At the same time, it is difficult for the attacker to hold the first 2 walls, because they will be shot down by the defender. Explained to him excitedly. "There is a tunnel underneath the tower. If we really can't hold it, we will escape through the tunnel." Major Gaston showed a disinterested expression. "The British will dig around and find the tunnels." Nick smiled and said, "There are 2 tunnels, one deep and one shallow. The shallow one is only dug out for more than 200 steps, just for the enemy to destroy. The deep one leads to the woods behind. Gaston was stunned for a moment. He knew very well that once the attacker dug a tunnel, they would think that everything was fine and would not look for another one. Fernand added, "We also incorporated some advanced weapons to defend." He gestured to the highest tower of power. A 4-pounder will be placed there. At the same time, a large barrel of gunpowder is buried at the entrance of the tunnel. If the British want to pursue it, they will get a very hot gift. The artillery factory in Mysore has begun to operate normally. The 4-pounder gun, as the simplest light gun, can be produced there every day and a half, which is enough to distribute a large number of PAs for defense point. Although the range of this kind of gun is limited, if it is installed on a high tower, and the PA itself is built on high ground, taking advantage of its condescending position, the range can even exceed that of the 8-pound gun. Lafayette looked at the simple civil building, but he couldn't help but smile. You know, this thing only required 3 Maori people, plus less than 400 Mysore serfs, and it took only half a month to build it. The 1-month construction period quoted by Magnus was based on the level of Maori tools. The Maori had not yet mastered metallurgical technology and used only wooden shovels and stone axes. As a result, Mysore serfs carried iron farm tools to work, and there were many oxen and horses to assist in the construction, so it took only half the time to complete the first PowerPoint. This is because the serfs are not familiar with construction. Once they are familiar with it, the speed will be even faster. The Governor General of India, Lord Charles Cornwallis, turned his head and glanced at the endless queue of lobster soldiers in red army uniforms and puffed out his stomach with satisfaction. Yes, reinforcement from the East India Company are coming, including the troops he had recently transferred from all over India. He now had 9,000 British soldiers, as well as a large number of heavy artillery and supplies on both wings of the British Army. Were 20,000 Maratha troops and 14,000 Hyderabad troops. At the same time, the 2 British vassal states continued to send troops to North Canada. With such a strong military force at hand, Cornwallis was confident enough to attack the city of Mysore within 3 months. Early next year, Tipu would sign the surrender document and pay the East India Company's huge war indemnity. He sneered and snorted, "Lafayette, this time I must return all the humiliation to North America." When he participated in the surrender ceremony of the British Army in Yorktown, the United States, Lafayette sat across from him with a proud look on his face. That afternoon, however, just 2 miles into Mangaluru, Mysore, the advanced troops halted. Cornwallis frowned and looked at his staff officer. "Michael, what happened?" The staff officer rushed to inquire about the situation. Half an hour later, he returned with an officer from the Forward Corps and reported to him, "General, Lieutenant Colonel Presley's regiment encountered the Mysore people." He glanced at the officer beside him. He said it was blocked by a bastion. "It's not a bastion," the officer said hurriedly. "It looks very simple. It is made of wood and earth, but there is a cannon on it, so the regiment leader decided to destroy it first." Cornwallis frowned and waved his hand. "Tell Presley to move faster." "Yes, General." At noon the next day, the Marquis of Cornwallis could not help but look gloomy as he listened to the continuous sound of cannons in the distance. The shelling had not stopped since yesterday morning. He got on his horse and rushed to the forward troops himself to check the situation. "I'm sorry, General." Lieutenant Colonel Presley glanced into the distance with a grimace. "That thing is very weird. It's difficult for the shells to have any effect. Moreover, only 12-pounders can bombard from a safe distance. An 8-pounder was nearly hit by a missile cannon yesterday." Cornwallis glared at him bitterly. "It's just a primitive Indian fortification. You mobilized 10 cannons and spent 2 days, but still failed to capture it." He ventured closer to the site of the battle and soon saw the bastion of Mysore in the telescope point. That thing looked like an oversized barn, but he immediately saw a black dot flying diagonally into the air after a large piece of wood chips burst out. He knew from experience that it should be a 12-pound shell. The Indians' broken barn actually caused a ricochet. Cornwallis angrily ordered his elite skirmisher battalion and 3 12-pound guns to be transferred, and ordered that the barn must be broken before dark. After the suppressive bombardment of heavy artillery, the British skirmisher battalion, under the cover of thousands of infantry, bravely rushed up the mound point. The missiles fought back behind the wooden wall, but their poor shooting skills and disorganized command only hit less than 24 British point then. The British skirmishers came to the first wall and climbed in through the gap. Cornwallis smiled triumphantly, put away the telescope, and returned to the temporary command post. In at most an hour, his officers will bring prisoners to report the battle situation to him. But soon, his battalion commander reported to him in disgrace that the first wave of assault had failed, with the loss of 27 soldiers. Cornwallis' eyelids twitched and he shouted, "Didn't you already break in?" "Yes, yes, General." The battalion commander lowered his head and said, "The missiles set fire in the first trench, and hid above, and threw stones at us. Before the cannons blasted the second wall, I could only choose to retreat temporarily." Note: one ricochet refers to the situation where a cannonball fails to penetrate the inclined surface immediately when it hits the inclined surface and is subjected to the deflection torque from the inclined surface, so it flies out along the inclined surface. The solid spherical shells fired by smoothbore cannons at the end of the 18th century were particularly prone to ricochets. Chapter 393 Talleyrand's travels around Europe. Cornwallis looked at the simple fortress in the distance with a dark face. After half a minute, he finally raised his hand to signal to the staff officer on the side, "Send the order, leave one battalion to continue the siege, and the other troops will bypass this damn thing. Regrouping and taking a detour might delay you for a day or two, but it's better than being disgusted by that crappy barn." However, just an hour and a half later, several teams of hussars sent back news that 2 more similar buildings were discovered less than 3 miles south of the barn point, and further away, there seems to be more. These fortifications densely guarded almost all traffic arteries, and even 3 of them were built across each other at important strategic node locations. If it's a strategy game, you might be able to micromanage the army to squeeze between the 2 forts. After all, the artillery above cannot cover a range of 2 or 3 miles. But in actual combat, this is completely impossible. When tens of thousands of troops are marching, the queue may be more than 10 kilometers long. The enemy will rush out of the fortress from time to surprise you. The queue in the marching state is defenseless. The enemy attack may not be able to kill a few of your people, but the stampede caused by the confusion of the queue can cause serious casualties and severely damage morale. Therefore, at least a few defensive points must be removed. A road at least 7 or 8 miles wide must be cleared, and part of the troops must be arrayed along both sides to defend, so that others dare to pass through the middle point. In fact, even this cannot guarantee safety. After all, the marching queue is too long and there may be defensive loopholes. Cornwallis looked at the red circle marked by the staff on the map, tried his best to suppress the anger in his chest, gritted his teeth and shouted, "Bring me all the cannons. Blast that barn to pieces." The staff officer was stunned. "Barn? It's that thing on the high ground. Damn it, call it whatever you want. Capture it at all costs." "Yes, General." The Merthyr and Hyderabad servant armies were pulled up and began to rush towards the power on the mound in waves, but they were pushed back again and again. After 9 days of anxious waiting, a British 12-pounder gun accurately hit the defensive artillery on top of the power. This probability in the era of smoothbore guns was basically the same as winning the lottery. The jackpot is almost the same. Then Cornwallis's elite grenadiers, regardless of casualties, finally broke through the last wall and poured into the high tower in the middle of Power Point. Cornwallis felt refreshed all over, as if he had finally passed out constipation after 9 days. He pointed at the power with his cane and said to the staff, "Bring the commanders of the garrison. Their tenacity deserves my praise." Before the staff officer left, he saw the tower on the Power shake, a large amount of black smoke spewing out, and then there was a loud boom. Soon, the courier sent news from the front. The missile people buried gunpowder in the fort, killing more than 30 grenadiers, and only captured 5 wounded prisoners. Cornwallis looked at the ruins on the mound with a livid face, and then looked south, knowing that there were several such barns waiting for him there. He suddenly felt a cramp in his stomach and almost vomited. come out. In fact, Magnus and his Mysore serfs have built more than 70 pars throughout Mangalore, and construction is still ongoing. Each par only stores food and drinking water for 25 days. This is a length of time required for their defense, after which the defenders can retreat. The British had to remove at least a quarter of them to successfully pass through the Mangalore area point. Even if they are lucky enough to hit the defenders' artillery directly every time, it will still take 9 days, so it will take 160 days to defeat Mangalore, and this is just a small province in the northwest of Mysore. The areas of Selangabad and Mysore city behind are even wider. It is basically impossible to penetrate Mysore within 2 or 3 years. This was Joseph's defensive strategy tailor-made for Mysore. Things like par have almost no value in Europe, where human resources are relatively precious and construction technology is advanced. It is more cost-effective to invest some money in building a bastion. But in India, where a large number of serfs can be recruited for free labor, par seems extremely suitable. Although it is not like the zero cost mentioned by Fernan, the construction does not cost much, but cannons, gunpowder, grain storage and transportation still costs him money. A par only cost Tipu Sultan about £400. That is 10,000 livres, a large part of which was shared by the local nobles. For Mysore, there is almost no limit to what can be built. At the same time, this thing requires very little construction skills. Primitive tribes on small Pacific islands can handle it, and mature feudal countries will have no problem. The most important thing is that, if it is placed in other places, the attackers can slowly gnaw away, and sooner or later the power of the civil structure can be worn away. However, the cost of the British expedition is extremely high, and it will take a few years to make them lose money to vomiting blood. Moreover, the Tiger of Mysore is not a casual person who will sit back and wait for the British to attack. Just as Cornwallis launched an attack on the second par, Tipu Sultan had led an army of 17,000 to invade Travancore. Travancore was no match at all, and had to hurriedly ask for help from the British. Cornwallis hurriedly mobilized 3,000 British troops and more than 10,000 servants, which were carried by the Royal Navy to Travancore. Just 3 days after the ship left the port, news came of the surrender of the Maharaja of Travancore to Mysore. So far, there is no hostile force in the south of Mysore. Tipu Sultan, at Lafayette's suggestion, immediately led his main force to the east of Carnatic. Lafayette commanded 20,000 Mysore troops in the northwest battlefield, relying on the par defense, so he didn't need to be distracted at all. If Carnatic was captured, the entire southern part of the Indian peninsula would fall into the hands of Mysore, and the strategic situation of Britain would become extremely ugly. At the same time, Salah, the French consul in Mysore, and Shah, a senior official of Mysore, were quietly rushing to Hyderabad. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince said that Indians love to take advantage and have no credibility. If Hyderabad can be tempted to turn against it with benefits, they had joined forces with Mysore to deal with Britain decades ago. That would be the best, of course. Even if it can't be done, it can make Britain pay more costs to stabilize Hyderabad. Western suburbs of Munich. Talleyrand straightened his clothes, stepped out of the carriage, and turned back to signal the accompanying guards. Please keep an eye on that guy. Follow me. 3 soldiers escorted a middle-aged man who was tied up like a dumpling, followed the French foreign minister, and walked towards the Munich palace. Music sounded all around. Bavaria's Grand Duke Carlotta stood at the palace gate across the honor guard, smiling at the visiting French. Chapter 394 French set meal. I hope the riots did not affect France. Theodore and Talleyrand walked side by side towards the drawing room, while the Bavarian Minister of State, Foreign Minister and others could only follow behind as foils. That was more than a simple riot, Your Majesty. Talleyrand's voice was loud enough to ensure that the surrounding Bavarian ministers could hear it. You must know the views of those liberals. They have always wanted to subvert the royal power, seeking to seize the wealth of the nobles. They are a group of dangerous lunatics, and what happened in the northwestern provinces of France was exactly what those lunatics instigated. They all deserve to be cursed. Theodore agreed casually, but in his heart he was wondering why the French came all the way to talk about such nonsense. It had nothing to do with him at all. Oh, I heard that Nando's rebels in the Netherlands seem to be involved. Yes, Your Majesty. The French foreign minister nodded immediately. The liberals I just mentioned are those southern Netherlands people. They are trying to murder our king with a riot. Theodore said to himself that you are at war with the rebels in the southern Netherlands. It is not surprising that they went to France to cause trouble, but he still pretended. Fortunately those guys didn't succeed. God bless your majesty. The group entered the reception hall, and Talleyrand suddenly said seriously, "Your majesty, don't you find this strange?" "What's weird? Why? Do the southern Netherlands rebels have the courage to launch a conspiracy against the French royal family?" Talleyrand looked at Theodore, and they can produce thousands of them in a short period of time. Guns and millions of livres, isn't it strange? Theodore was startled, and slowly sat down on the chair above. "You mean, all of this was done by a big country instructing them?" Talleyrand waved his hands vigorously with righteous indignation. "They killed their own king, and then secretly supported the southern Netherlands to launch a rebellion in an attempt to remove this land from the seized from the hands of the Holy Roman Emperor. After the southern Netherlands was controlled by the rebels, they were still not satisfied and prepared to spread the revolution there to France." Theodore and all the ministers present felt their hearts tightened when they heard this. It has nothing to do with the southern Netherlands' intention to murder the French king, but if it is the former who want to export revolution, that is another matter. Liberal revolution is a nightmare that haunts every monarch, a plague that will kill the empire if it touches even a little bit. They immediately thought that that big country was the first country to be infected by the plague. The glorious revolution beheaded Charles I and exiled James II. Moreover, judging from the current situation of Hanoverians supporting the southern Netherlands rebels on the battlefield in the southern Netherlands, the people standing behind the liberals in the southern Netherlands must be the British. Talleyrand continued. The English Parliament has control over their king and over all of England. They want other countries to do the same, and they will murder the king if he gets in the way. They will incite revolution everywhere, and what happened in France is the beginning. If the monarchs don't unite to stop it, similar things will happen in Austria, Spain, Sweden, Bavaria. In the meal Joseph prepared for Britain, the situation in India was the main course, and the accusation of exporting revolution was the gravy. He clearly remembered that in history, European monarchs' fear of France exporting revolution eventually led to the anti-French alliance. The British took advantage of this to gather together the European countries and consume France to death. At the moment, the British don't seem to realize that the trick they are encouraging the southern Netherlands to play in France is actually to export revolution. The southern Netherlands parliament is in the hands of liberals, and at the same time, a large number of liberals are making trouble in France. Partisans, and they were cooperating with French liberals. Now that the British had their cards handed to them, Joseph naturally didn't mind letting them taste the wrath of European monarchs. The Bavarian foreign minister looked at Talleyrand hesitantly. "Archbishop Talleyrand, you may be a bit alarmist." Talleyrand immediately signaled outside the hall. "I have brought a man. You can ask him yourself." Theodore gestured to the guards in confusion to bring in the prisoners escorted by French soldiers. Talleyrand said to the man, "Who are you?" "Stephen Albert Vesalius." Immediately, a Bavarian official remembered this name. "It's the Speaker of the Southern Netherlands. I mean the secretary of the leader of the rebels." "Yes, this person is Van de Noot's secretary, the highest ranking person in the Committee of Free Alliances captured by the French intelligence agency." Talleyrand continued. "Please tell everyone why Van der Noot intends to overthrow the French royal family." Vesalius lowered his head and said, "It was the instruction of British Foreign Secretary Wellesley. He told the Speaker, we must launch a revolution to overthrow that tyrant. He also proposed a plan to spread rumors about France's land redemption plan, use the dissatisfaction of French farmers and nobles to create riots, and eventually Louis XVI were ousted, and the French parliament was established." There was an uproar in the reception hall. Although what Vesalius said was not entirely true, if he said what the French asked, he would get a sum of money and go to the United States to spend the rest of his life. He just messed up the order, or put the wrong things on the wrong things, but not a single word was fabricated. Even if the Bavarians checked, they would most likely come to the conclusion that what was said is true. Talleyrand gestured to the outside of the Munich palace. I also brought more than 20 Dutch rebels. If necessary, your majesty can send people to interrogate them. With Vesalius's words in mind, no matter what those people said later, everyone would think of the British point. A few hours later, the Grand Duke of Bavaria, Theodore, looked at Talleyrand with a firm gaze and said seriously, we must unite and do our best to urge the British to give up this terrible idea. The next day, Talleyrand left Munich and rushed to Württemberg Point in his itinerary plan. There were also Mainz, Upper Hesse, Austria, Sweden and other countries, and he would tell them what he said to the Bavarians yesterday. Point after that, he will go to Saxony, Lower Hesse, and even Prussia. Although these countries are currently following the British, they will turn against the British at any time if it comes to major issues such as exporting revolution. Point as for whether these countries believe it or not, he doesn't care. Even if they don't believe it, the British will waste a lot of diplomatic resources if they want to explain this matter clearly. Chapter 395 The Southern Netherlands Initiative. Austria. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Joseph II tried to raise his withered right hand, and only an unclear sound came out of his throat. Tally. Leopold II on the side hurriedly guessed, Your Majesty, are you talking about Talleyrand? Seeing the Emperor nod, he continued, are you very concerned about what he said about the British intention to export revolution? Talleyrand had just finished his visit to Austria and stayed for 3 days. He criticized the British conspiracy to overthrow monarchs of various countries in Vienna. It is worth vigilance, Joseph II said, rested for 10 seconds, and then continued with difficulty. First, use, Leopold II followed his words and added, you mean, we can use this to weaken the British influence on the situation in the southern Netherlands? The Holy Roman Emperor nodded weakly. Cooperation, France, on the point of squeezing the British out of the German region. France and Austria are very consistent. Yes, Your Majesty, I understand. I will take care of it. West of the Mediterranean, Almeria Bay. In the conference room of the Colossus, a third-class battleship of the British Royal Navy, Lord Thomas, the British envoy to the Maghreb countries, was reporting to the Foreign Secretary, the Moroccan Sultan has agreed to launch an attack on Bizet, as long as we make concessions on grain, import tariffs and use Morocco as a transit point for textile trade in North Africa. At present, there are 14,000 Moroccan guards on standby in Annaba. These people are basically equipped with brown bess flintlocks and equipped with 20 cannons. The Marquis of Wellesley nodded without thinking much. Tell the Moroccans that their request will be considered by the parliament. Compared with the situation in India, the empire's interests in North Africa can be given up, and using Morocco as a trade transit will not have any impact on British profits. I will go to Morocco as soon as possible, Marquis. Lord Thomas continued, Algiers has also prepared an army of 12,000 people, but you also know that their combat effectiveness is not worth looking forward to. The Algiers guards were previously beaten by Joseph, and they have not recovered after more than half a year. Well, let their navy increase harassment of French merchant ships. Marquis Wellesley gave an order and asked, what about Tripoli? Currently, Benguiel has 12,000 Ottoman guards. Thomas said, but he has made secret contacts with him according to your instructions, and he is only willing to send no more than 800 troops to plunder. After all, Constantinople has never wanted to offend France. Marquis Wellesley waved his hand indifferently. It doesn't matter. I came here to solve this matter this time. He has obtained a grant of £350,000 from the British Parliament, which is nearly 9 million livres. Of this money, £100,000 was used to bribe Benguiel. Later, he would go to Constantinople and provide a certain degree of diplomatic support and trade concessions to the Ottomans in exchange for Selim III turning a blind eye to the unauthorized actions of the Tripoli garrison. Wellesley had absolute confidence that Benguiel, the Ottoman warlord, was driven by huge profits. As long as the Ottoman Sultan did not hold him accountable, he had enough courage to provoke the French army in Tunisia. In addition, Tripoli also had a fleet of nearly 300 ships, although most of them were small boats and were by no means a match for the French navy. If they could get British intelligence, artillery, and port supply support, they still had the ability to seriously disrupt France's trade in the Mediterranean. Wellesley knew that the troubles encountered by the East India Company in Mysore were very difficult. This time Britain would definitely have to give up some interests to France to solve this matter, so he had to try his best to create bargaining chips for himself so that he could minimize losses during negotiations. He even planned to let the pirates in Algiers and Tripoli harass the coastal cities in southeastern France to increase the pressure on France after the French army in Tunisia fell into a passive position, being attacked from both sides by nearly 40,000 troops, and the French army with only more than 20,000 people would inevitably be exhausted. In addition to his layout in the southern Netherlands, if he was lucky, he might not have to pay anything to exchange for France to stop interfering in the situation in Mysore. However, when the Colossus arrived at the port of Mitiga for a simple supply and was about to weigh anchor, a fast paddle boat of the Royal Navy, the Louis, came chasing from Gibraltar. The Marquis of Wellesley was talking to Thomas in the cabin about how to use Britain's naval advantage to attack France's trade in the Caribbean. Although Britain and France had a series of treaty restrictions, there must be a way to bypass the treaty to deal with the French. The sugar exports from Saint-Domingue contributed more than 40 million livres of fiscal revenue to the French government every year. Just when the two had just begun to make some progress, an official from the Breathless knocked on the door and handed Wellesley the latest European intelligence. The Foreign Secretary took out a few pages of documents from the mailbox, waved them at Thomas, and smiled. "I guess there is good news from Van der Noot." He unfolded the paper, read only a few lines, and his smile froze on his face. "My Lord Marquis, what is the situation in the southern Netherlands?" Thomas asked rather tactlessly. "Damn the French." Wellesley put away the documents with a gloomy face, hesitated for a moment, gritted his teeth, and shouted to the outside of the cabin, "Tommy, help me call Captain Taylor." He looked at Thomas again. "The affairs of Tripoli and the Ottoman Empire are left to you. I must go back to Europe first." The intelligence mentioned that Austria, Spain, Bavaria, Mainz and other countries have submitted notes to Britain, requesting to clarify Britain's attitude towards the rebellion in the southern Netherlands and the connection between the previous liberal riots in France and Britain. Especially the notes from Austria and Spain. The wording was very harsh, and the words between the lines were criticizing Britain's export of revolution in Europe. Wellesley turned his back and looked out the porthole irritably. He was still careless. He didn't expect that the shameless French would actually link the incitement of riots with exporting revolution. He knew very well that, if this matter was not handled properly, it would likely lead to a diplomatic disaster. More than 10 days later, when Wellesley left Cologne for Prussia, yes, even William II had questioned Britain, he suddenly received news that Ludwig IX, the head of Hesse-Darmstadt, had proposed a Southern Netherlands initiative. Chapter 396. The busy Marquis of Wellesley. Ludwig IX was politically more Prussian, but he stated in the initiative that, if the southern Netherlands insisted on breaking away from Austrian rule, a king must be elected to manage the southern Netherlands. Otherwise the Parliament of the southern Netherlands should not be recognized by any monarch. The initiative has received responses from 10 countries including Spain, France, Bavaria and Mainz. What surprised the Marquis of Wellesley most was that Austria was also one of the signatories of the initiative. But he immediately understood the relationship. The Austrians signed the Parliament of the Southern Netherlands should not be recognized by any monarch. They determined that the Southern Netherlands could not accept the election of a king now in charge of the Southern Netherlands. The members of the Land Parliament were Van der Noot's group of liberals. It would be easier for them to choose a king for themselves than to let them go to the gallows. In fact, Austria is the biggest driving force behind the Southern Netherlands initiative. As for the copyright of the initiative, it is naturally held by Joseph II's precious nephew. Wellesley angrily poked the ground with his cane and scolded Ludwig IX in his heart. If Britain now also requires the Southern Netherlands to elect a king, it will be equivalent to pushing the Southern Netherlands Parliament to oppose itself. And if you reject the initiative, you will be secluded from the entire continent. He immediately ordered his men to set off and rushed to Potsdam overnight. A few days later, after he promised William II to provide £500,000 of aid and handed all the affairs of the southern Netherlands to Prussia so that Britain would no longer intervene, he finally resolved the latter's Suspicions then, Wellesley rushed to Saxony without stopping. At the same time, London was also crowded with diplomats from various countries in addition to receiving 7 or 8 rounds of diplomatic envoys every day, and explaining to them that Britain had no intention of exporting revolution. British Prime Minister Peter Jr. also had to be called by George III from time to time to inquire about the situation, which made him exhausted. In the British Parliament, the Whigs did not miss this opportunity to suppress him, and various questions continued. Even Fox was planning to initiate a vote of no confidence in him, but fortunately, he was forced to do so by the king, thus saving his political life. After a month of tossing, Peter Jr. and George III made an official announcement. After repeated discussions in the announcement, the UK first stated that the previous riots in France had nothing to do with the UK. Then he said that he did not agree with the current political situation in southern Netherlands, but he did not relent on the election of the king. Finally, it also promised that Britain would suggest that Hanoverian troops gradually withdraw from the southern Netherlands, and would not oppose Austria's restoration of rule over the southern Netherlands. After making these huge concessions, and being appeased by Wellesley country by country, and transferring many benefits, the condemnation of Britain by various countries gradually weakened. The British Parliament, which has resumed normal operations, has also begun to deal with the backlog of affairs during this period. A document submitted by Lord Thomas, the special envoy to the Maghreb, regarding tariff concessions to Morocco and set it as recommendations for textile transit points in North Africa. Wellesley was still in Italy, putting out the exporting revolution issue, and was unable to attend a parliamentary inquiry, so the matter was temporarily shelved. On the other side, the anxious Wellesley finally basically completed his diplomatic mission and immediately went to Brussels to understand the implementation of the previous deployment. According to his plan, Van de Noot will send people to Wallonia to incite trouble, preferably spreading chaos to Luxembourg. He knew that France had significant investments in Luxembourg, so stability there would be an important bargaining chip for him when talking to the French about India. However, as soon as he arrived at the border of the southern Netherlands, he received an order from Prime Minister Peter the Younger to stop all contact with the Southern Netherlands Parliament and return to London as soon as possible. George III was already almost suffering from a mental relapse due to the criticism of exporting revolution. He suffered from porphyria, note 1, and he had only recovered from the last attack less than half a year ago. The entire British royal family was worried at this time, fearing that he would be stimulated crazy again. So they repeatedly asked Peter not to get involved in the affairs of the liberals in the South Netherlands. When Wellesley returned to London, he discovered that the benefits he had promised to Morocco were still stuck in Parliament. He had been running around everywhere and being looked down upon by others, and had almost forgotten about it. Then he hurried to the Parliament to explain the details of the exchange of interests and urge the Parliament to vote. By the time Morocco did receive the British interests, nearly 3 months had passed since Wellesley's last trip to North Africa. The Marquis of Cornwallis's attack in Mysore was frustrated, and he asked for more troops. The news that Mysore occupied the entire territory of Travancore and invaded the Carnatic was sent back to the United Kingdom. The whole of London suddenly exploded. Paris Mars Room, Palace of Versailles, Your Majesty, you have won 9 games in a row, and now you are at the peak of your luck. At the big baccarat table, a 7 or 8-year-old Russian girl sat obediently next to Queen Mary, blinking her blue eyes, looking at the latter with big eyes. I think you should continue to stick to your intuition. Okay, sweetheart, I'll listen to you. Queen Mary giggled, grabbed a handful of gold agar, and placed it in front of the Zhuang grid. I think this game is still Zhuang. The little girl picked up a piece of cake and put it in her mouth, muttering in a very small voice, if you keep winning like this, your uncle won't keep nagging me about France's financial problems. Oh, this is too sweet. Does the chef have a way to buy duty-free sugar? If it weren't for the Queen of France's enthusiastic invitation and her uncle's constant urging, she really didn't want to come to such a boring place. The dealer in front suddenly announced calmly, the banker wins. Wow, 10 consecutive wins. Queen Mary jumped up from her chair excitedly, turned around and hugged Alexandra, and kissed her hard. You are really my angel, dear. 10 consecutive wins. Do you know? I haven't won like this for a long time, since She knew that her son was interested in this little girl. She would send people to invite her to the Palace of Versailles from time to time to participate in various balls, concerts, and gambling games to create opportunities for her son. It's a pity that Joseph has been very busy and rarely participates in these social activities, but she and the little girl are getting more and more familiar with each other. Queen Mary hugged Alexandra, but she couldn't help thinking of her niece, and then she sighed softly. How great it would be if Joseph liked Clementine, and she would be standing next to her now. She was suddenly startled, and the scene of Clementine accompanying her to gamble last year unexpectedly emerged in her mind. It seemed that she had hardly won at that time, and the worst time she even lost 17 games in a row, and she was so depressed that she couldn't sleep for half the night. She looked at Alexandra again, and suddenly the regret in her heart became much less. Note 1. Porphyria, also known as hemopurphyria, is a group of porphyrin metabolic disorders caused by the lack of a certain enzyme or reduced enzyme activity in the heme synthesis pathway. It can be a congenital disease or an acquired disease. The main clinical symptoms include photosensitivity, digestive system symptoms, and mental and neurological symptoms. Chapter 397, The New Symbol of Paris. The gambling game in the Mars Hall lasted until 1 AM. Queen Mary, who was so happy with her win, looked at the pile of gold coins on the table and quietly yawned. Then she stood up with satisfaction and prepared to return to the little Trianon. According to palace rules, the king and his wife will hold a bedtime ceremony at 10:30 in the evening. That is, the nobles will watch them sleep, but because Louis XVI often works overtime in the royal workshop, this rule has long existed in name only. She stretched lazily, looked at the empty seat next to her, turned around and asked Countess de Berninac, "Where is my little Petersburg honey?" The latter quickly came closer and whispered, "Your Majesty, she went to bed at 10 o'clock. Look, I forgot about it." Queen Mary smiled and patted her forehead. "She's still growing." She left the Mars Hall and didn't go far when she heard the voices of several ladies chatting from the corner of the corridor ahead. "Did you also notice the Russian Grand Duchess? It's impossible not to pay attention to her recently. She doesn't know who she is, and she often appears next to Her Majesty the Queen recently. I think His Majesty likes her quite a lot. I heard His Majesty call her little honey several times at night. Oh, Her Majesty the Queen should just be fresh for a while. I bet that Your Majesty will not pay attention to her in the next month at most." That's probably the case. Look at her wearing the most popular dress of the season, but she still can't block the rustic look on her body, just like a thick eye basket can't block the candlelight. Haha, it's so vivid, the ladies said as they walked around the corner, and when they saw Her Majesty the Queen approaching, they were so frightened that they retreated to the edge of the corridor, lowered their heads and curtsied, not daring to breathe. Queen Mary glared at them angrily and walked quickly with her head held high, but their mocking words echoed in her ears. She suddenly thought of something and began to blame herself secretly. I had been so inconsiderate of Joseph before. It turned out that he was not shy at all, but worried that choosing a Russian fiancé would cause the royal family to be discussed by the nobles. Alas, he is such a good boy who takes the overall situation into consideration. Queen Mary was very aware of the French's sense of superiority. As a Habsburg princess, she would have been looked down upon by them, let alone a Russian girl of Tatar descent. Note 1. She recalled her anguish and bitterness when she was secretly called Austria's cousin by the group of French nobles. And she immediately made a decision. She had to work harder to help her son get married with a cute little Russian princess. After all, the rain you have been exposed to cannot fall on the children's heads again. Early the next morning, Queen Mary was discussing the script with her troop foreman when she saw the crown prince coming quickly led by his maid. After Joseph saluted, she immediately stepped forward to give her son a hug and said with a smile, "Dear, you can't always be busy with work. Necessary social interaction is also an important part of life, especially for members of the royal family." The most annoying thing for Joseph was the dance party, so he hurriedly agreed perfunctorily and then quickly turned to the main topic. "Dear mother, there will be a gas street lamp first installation ceremony in Paris next month. If you are free, I hope you can come and attend. In fact, the construction of the gas distillation plant has just begun, and the gas lamps have not been put into mass production. However, Murdoch has completed the testing of distillation, gas transmission, and gas lamps. Therefore, Joseph plans to erect a small number of gas street lamps first to build momentum for the gas lamp industry. On the basis of absorbing private investment, he can also use this hotspot to develop real estate projects. Yes, gaslighting itself is more focused on infrastructure construction and cannot bring much direct benefits, but real estate can point. He has purchased all the public land in the Tuileries Gardens, where the first gas street lamps will be piloted. Point as you can imagine, after nightfall, the streets of Paris fell into a hazy night, with at most a few oil lamps emitting dim light. However, around the properties in the Tuileries garden, there were bright gas street lamps, and people were walking a few meters away. You can see the luxurious villas there from a street away, and you can't help but drool with envy. Coupled with the schools, hospitals, buses and other supporting systems built during Paris Fashion Week, wealthy people in Paris will definitely rush to buy houses here. The previous villas in the Palace Garden community have been sold for 70,000 livres. A house with gas street lights must be sold for 100,000 livres. Don't be too expensive. There are thousands of foreign tycoons pouring into Paris now. This kind of luxury real estate can be snatched up for you in minutes. You know, the urban area of Paris has been expanded twice in the past 2 years, but it still seems increasingly crowded. The excellent environment and public security here have attracted a large number of outsiders to settle here. The census given to Joseph by the Minister of Household Registration last month stated that the current population of Paris has exceeded 700,000. However, Joseph estimated that there should be tens of thousands of people at the bottom who have not been counted. After all, these people leave early and return late to work, and it is difficult for household registration officials to catch them. The demand for real estate generated by such a huge migrant population is staggering. After the gas street lamps triggered a craze for high-end real estate, he will next develop mid-range housing for ordinary nobles and let major banks start real estate loan projects to stimulate capital flows. Throughout France, gas street lamp, Queen Mary was a little surprised. I often hear Count Mirabeau mention this word, but dear, it's just a lamp. Why do our Crown Prince and Minister of Industry attach so much importance to it? Joseph smiled and explained to her, "Mother, this is completely different from the oil lamp now. First of all, it is very bright, and unlike the dim light of the oil lamp, it emits a white light closer to the sun. I will ask Mr. Murdoch to send you one in 2 days. You will know after you try it. After using it, you will definitely want to throw all the candles and oil lamps in the palace into the trash can. Secondly, it uses gas pipelines to supply fuel, which is much more convenient than candles or oil lamps. As long as you pay the gas bill, you can use it all the time, without having to replace new candles or add oil." Queen Mary showed a very interested expression. "Well, this sounds really good. Yes, it will bring a new fashion trend," Joseph said confidently, "and thus become another symbol of Paris." Note: 1. Because the Mongols once ruled Russia, in the minds of Europeans, Russians are all descendants of Tatars, which is one of the important reasons why they look down on Russians. In fact, Russia is still mainly of Russian descent, and also mixed with genes from European immigrants, Baltic residents, Tungus, Central Asian nomads, and Turks. In comparison, Tatar genes are not many. Chapter 398 Queen Mary's birthday gift. Joseph knows better than anyone else that historically London has turned its gas street lights into its business card, which has enhanced the quality of the entire UK, and thus attracted talents and investments from all over the world. Of course, this is also based on the UK's own wealth and good investment environment. However, there is no doubt that the London gas street lighting project has greatly accelerated the development of the UK. Now Joseph is going to take this hotspot to France. He continued to draw the cake to Queen Mary and said, "You can imagine that Paris, which originally fell asleep after dark, will now be full of vitality under the illumination of gas lights. People will still be active outside after dark, and there will be several more shops hours of operation, resulting in higher revenue. At the same time, Criminal acts such as theft and robbery that are committed at night will be greatly reduced under the illumination of streetlights. Paris will become more prosperous, safer and more attractive. He also had some advantages of gas lamps which he had not mentioned to Queen Mary. For example, after the scale of use of this thing increases, the cost of lighting is much lower than that of candles and oil lamps, which allows more people to use lights and improves the quality of life. In addition, cheap high brightness lighting greatly extends factory operation hours. Well, in layman's terms, it means that workers can be allowed to work overtime. Overtime, something that ordinary people hate deeply, turned out to be a huge productivity improvement at the end of the 18th century. In the same factory, with the same workers, my output can be 30% more than yours for no reason. The resulting output and cost advantages are no less than a major technological innovation. Of course, what follows is the health problem of workers, which requires government legislation to deal with. Otherwise, with the ruthlessness of the capitalists in this era, they are guaranteed to allow workers to work 24 hours a day. Finally, gas lamps require large-scale refining of gas, which can stimulate the coal industry, and the coal tar produced can stimulate organic chemistry. That's why Joseph attached so much importance to this industry and invited the Queen to appear at the first dressing ceremony. After Paris was completely covered with gas street lights, they took advantage of the situation and held the World's Fair, which pushed Paris to the top of the European metropolises in one fell swoop. When Queen Mary heard that a mere lamp was so important, she immediately agreed. "Okay, dear, I will definitely attend your ceremony, thank you. You are really the best mother in the world." Joseph picked up the cake on the side and fed it into Queen Mary's mouth. The latter chewed with a smile and caught a glimpse of the script aside from the corner of her eye. She was a theater fan, not only loved watching plays, but also often performed on stage herself. This script is the second part of Breaking the Sky that her troupe will perform recently. Queen Mary suddenly remembered what happened last night, and a great idea immediately came to her mind. She looked at Joseph and smiled. "My dear, the leading actor in my troupe has been ill recently. Well, I think you are the best replacement. Look at my crown prince, who is better than any actor in the troupe. Handsome and handsome." When Joseph heard this, he seemed to suddenly put on a mask of pain. Not to mention that he didn't like acting at all. Rehearsing and performing would take a lot of time, and he still had a lot of things to deal with. However, his mother had just promised him to attend the first installation ceremony of the gas street lamp. It would be a bit meaningless if he refused. Joseph hesitated. "Then let's agree, and let's just put on a show." Just in the middle of speaking, he suddenly caught a glimpse of the title of the script, and his heart suddenly tightened. "I go. Refining the Sky? As for the male lead, you want me to play Hunter's IO? For such a middle-class character, if you can't play the first scene, you will die of embarrassment." He immediately shook his head. "This won't work. I will definitely star in another script next time." Queen Mary stopped him. "My dear, don't you even help your helpless mother. No, it's mainly about the script. My birthday is coming soon," Queen Mary said in a decisive move. "This play is going to be performed on my birthday, so just think of it as helping me fulfill my birthday wish." Joseph had a headache for a while, and his mother had talked about all the things he had to agree. Even if he didn't agree, he nodded helplessly. "Okay then, that's great, my dear." Queen Mary hugged him. "I will invite all the nobles in the Palace of Versailles to come and see it. I believe you will have a wonderful performance." Invite all nobles. Joseph couldn't help being startled when he heard this. He knew that this was an exaggeration. A theater could not accommodate so many people, but those who could be invited by Her Majesty the Queen must be nobles with extraordinary status. Well, so this is an opportunity. He thought to himself that, although the production lines for soda and casein glue have not yet been built, it does not prevent him from making GG for synthetic board furniture and soda and sparkling drinks. The most prestigious nobles in the Palace of Versailles are all gathered together, and they are bound to have a huge driving effect. During the period before the product is released, you can also engage in a wave of hunger marketing. When the product is actually launched, it will be sold like crazy. By the way, I have to ask my mother, to help with the endorsement point. Thinking of this, the bitterness on his face instantly faded, and he looked at Queen Mary with a smile. "Dear mother, I have thought about what birthday gift I want to give you. Those are some very good furniture." North Africa. Tunisia. Manuel Jacques de Chanel stepped off the gangplank, and his heart was suddenly at ease. The constant shaking on the sea almost killed him. After waiting for a while, the servant Victor led his beloved Gallic horse from the transport ship. The poor horse seemed to be seasick, and there was still foam left at the corners of his mouth from vomiting. "Well, the suffering is over." Chanel took the reins, raised his arms vigorously, and shouted, "Tunisia will witness the arrival of his hero." He glanced at the hundreds of nobles who were traveling with him behind him, and ordered the servants, "Matthew, go buy some high quality oats nearby. The flying crossbow needs to be well taken care of. I'll go and ask where the assembly point is." Matthew stretched out his hand pitifully. "Master, I only have 1 livre and 6 sous left here. I'm afraid I can't buy much." Chanel frowned. In order to obtain a fief in North Africa and win glory for his family, he came to Tunisia to join the army at his own expense. Well, since the last speech by the Dauphin, it has become a trend in the Palace of Versailles for young nobles to go to the front line to fight. When the noble ladies see the young man, they will ask, "Why don't you use your sword to win glory for yourself?" Chanel reluctantly took out 10 silver coins and handed them to the servant. "Go. Pay attention to the quality. Don't be cheated by people who sell inferior goods as good ones." From the time he left Paris to the time he arrived here, he had spent 140 livres. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 399. God's Guidance. Cavalry Regiment. Chanel moved the Cholville carbine on his back and put several bags of luggage on his shoulders. In order to let his mount rest, he was not willing to let it carry anything. Jacques, a familiar aristocratic young man, ran past him and shouted sideways, "Victor asked us to gather immediately, right there. Hurry." Chanel reached out to grab the man. "What happened?" "I heard that the Algiers attacked the border." The latter shook him off forcefully. "Victor said that the troops are all in the lower reaches of the Magelda River. Currently, only the Tunisians are defending Northwest Bizet. That is our opportunity." Chanel hurriedly adjusted his military uniform and ran to the assembly point in the distance. In front of the crooked queue of nobles, a young nobleman with a square face was standing on the top of a carriage, waving the sword in his hand and speaking loudly. "General Schur's main force will probably not be able to intercept the sneak attack of the Algiers. This is our perfect opportunity." He waved vigorously. "My dearest classmates, the time has come to show your superb military qualities. As long as we can get to Tamilé before dark tomorrow, we can make great achievements and win supreme glory." Chanel immediately started shouting. This Victor was the popular figure in their school's law school, and it was he who called everyone to come to Tunisia to fight. Not only his own University of Rennes, hundreds of young nobles along the way joined his team. Although Victor only has the rank of lieutenant, which his father bought for him on the eve of the military reform, he has also become the leader of his own people. Haha, a bunch of guys who just know how to brag. Following the sound of footsteps, a group of young people wearing shabby military uniforms or even just shirts passed behind them and made bursts of mockery. They didn't even form a team, they just thought about the supreme glory. Haha, all nobles are like this. They are 1,000 times more powerful with their mouths than their hands. Let them continue to amuse themselves. By the time they start to move, we will have beaten the Algiers to the ground." Victor immediately looked at the young officer on horseback with thinning hair and melancholy eyes in front of the team and shouted dissatisfied, "Lieutenant Nee, please take care of your people and don't interfere with our pre-war preparations." The latter glanced at him coldly, then waved his hand to the queue behind him and said, "Quiet, everyone. Speed up the march." "Yes." The non-commissioned officers in the queue immediately shouted in response and began to restrain the soldiers. At the same time, their only 4 old snare drums were beaten louder, and the entire team immediately fell silent. Victor watched the civilian team disappear quickly, and became a little anxious. The civilians came to Tunisia on a naval transport ship with them. There were 800 or 900 people. I didn't expect them to move so fast. It seems that the civilian officer named Michelny has some real ability. He quickly interrupted his speech and ordered the young nobles to form a team and prepare to go to Tamire Point. That is the westernmost town in Bizerta. As long as it is defended there, the Algiers army can be prevented from going deep into Bizerta Point. Stimulated by the ridicule just now, the noble volunteers moved quickly one by one. Only an hour later, they formed a marching column and rushed westward amidst the rhythmic music of military drums and organs. The officers on the naval transport ship saw both groups leaving without authorization and hurriedly chased after them and asked them to report to General Schurrer first, but no one paid any attention to him. But when Chanel's servant Matthew rushed back to the dock panting with 2 bags of oats on his back, his master had long since disappeared. Victor finally saw the camp of the civilian team before nightfall and immediately urged his horses forward happily. Almost everyone in the noble team rode a horse, and some servants even prepared horses. They also paid local Tunisian people to carry their horses along the way. They were carrying luggage and hauling heavy vehicles, so their marching speed was a bit faster than that of civilians. Nee, who was inspecting the camp, also saw him and unexpectedly took the initiative to say hello. Lieutenant Moreau, to be honest, your speed is quite surprising to me. This is nothing. Victor Moreau nodded to him. We are the gods guided cavalry. How can we not even catch up with the infantry? Nee frowned slightly. Gods, guidance, oh, although it has not yet been officially recognized by the general staff, this name will definitely be remembered by France. Victor Moreau wanted to say that they, the nobles, listened to the call of the sons of the gods and joined the army, so they got this popular name, the guidance of the sons of the gods, which rounded up is equivalent to god of guidance. Nee shook her head at this silly name and thought to herself, it seems that there is no need to expect any help from the noble gentleman behind. In the early morning of the next day, Moreau was about to brush his teeth under the first ray of sunlight when he heard the faint sound of drums not far away. He immediately looked at the attendant and asked, the civilians have broken out of camp. It seems so. Lieutenant Moreau immediately picked up a military drum and beat it hard, shouting anxiously, all the troops must be assembled. Get ready to go. London. The Marquis of Wellesley felt a little more at ease after reading the secret report of the Moroccan and Algiers coalition forces dispatching troops the day before yesterday. The Parliament had passed the Prime Minister's proposal, which would use some interests in the Caribbean and recognition of France's claim to Tunisia in exchange for France's non-interference in the situation in India. The premise of all this is that France will encounter enough trouble in North Africa. At present, 40,000 troops in North Africa are attacking Tunisia at the same time. This is the bargaining chip he needs. He only waited for the French cabinet to start discussing the reinforcement of troops in North Africa and then immediately went to Paris to negotiate with them. Algiers and Tunisia's northern border, a group of black troops wearing thin yellow shirts, white breeches, and carrying brown Bess flintlock guns were marching along the mountain pass in a mighty manner. The group of tens of thousands of people stretched to nearly 2 miles away. Said, wearing a trapezoidal red leather hat, looked towards the plains in the distance and asked the black officer beside him, a gold, how far is it from Bizet? Less than 5 miles, Pasha said, nodded proudly. The cavalry who returned at noon saw the main force of the French army in the lower reaches of the Majerda River, which was a full 3 days journey north of Bizet. By the time the French realized that the Algiers guards were just bait and wanted to return north for rescue, they had already occupied the port of Bizet. After that, whether they want to continue to attack the Tunisian city eastward or turn south to Karaoun, they will have a very big initiative. Even if an unfavorable situation arises, he can still threaten the French army by burning the port of Bizet, making him almost invincible. As long as he spends a month or 2 in Tunisia, he can return to Morocco, and the British will pay a huge reward of 2 million rials for this. Chapter 400 Non-professional players. Said asked someone to fetch a map, look at it, and said to a gold, order the forward to arrive at Tamire before this afternoon. Rest there for a day, and the entire army will attack Cape Serrat the day after tomorrow. Cape Serrat is the only town west of Bizet. According to intelligence, there should be 3 to 4,000 Tunisian troops stationed there. After occupying Cape Serrat, it will be a smooth road to the port of Bizet. The Black Officer bowed down to accept the order and quickly conveyed the order of the Moroccan Guards commander. He followed the soldiers and hummed Sal's country tunes. These soldiers had only trained for less than 4 months and knew only these songs, and estimated in his mind how long it would take to reach Tamire Point at this moment. His company commander galloped towards him on horseback and shouted, "The Moroccans have been discovered, and there are only less than 4 kilometers left to Tamire." They were severely short of cavalry, so they had to rely on company commanders and other officers who could ride horses to serve as hussars for a reconnaissance point. When Nelly heard this, her heart suddenly tightened. It seemed that he would arrive at Tamire later than the enemy point, in this way it will become a tough battle point. He hurriedly asked the company commander, "How many people are there in the enemy army?" "At least 2,000, maybe 3,000. Nee frowned even more. He didn't even have 1,000 soldiers in his hands. It might be okay to defend Tamire, but it would be difficult to win. If he attacked point, should we retreat to Cape Serrat? He turned his head and looked behind him. If he did, he would definitely be laughed at by the nobles. He gritted his teeth and shouted to the soldiers, "Speed up the march. We want to show those nobles who is the real warrior." The soldiers immediately cheered. "Let the noble gentleman have a look. Victory belongs to us. Long live His Majesty the King." Most of these people are farmers whose families have purchased land. After they heard that His Royal Highness the Crown Prince called for civilians to join the army, as long as their families had spare labor, they all actively signed up. They originally just wanted to repay His Majesty the King for realizing their dream of obtaining land. After understanding France's current military policy, they realized that they could also be promoted to officers through military merit. And if you make meritorious deeds, your life will be worry-free. Therefore, although the training level of this rookie army is limited, its morale is extremely high. This is the fundamental reason why Joseph resisted huge resistance to engage in land distribution. Only by enhancing the identification of the vast majority of the bottom people in France with the country can the country's power be truly unleashed. The population of France during the emperor's time was not much larger than it is now, but he could easily mobilize an army of 600,000. But now France cannot even mobilize an army of 160,000. This is because the French Grand Order greatly aroused the enthusiasm of the people and completed the task. National consciousness awakened, and national affairs were no longer just the obligations of the nobles, but something that every Frenchman cared about. If France could mobilize 600,000 troops now and ensure logistical supplies, it would be able to sweep across the European continent in no time. The current British, Austrian and Prussian forces together can recruit more than 400,000 troops, which is completely insufficient. Of course, land policy alone is not enough to give the French people an absolute national identity, but it is already a very big step. He looked at the obviously accelerated pace of the soldiers, loudly encouraged their morale, and kept telling the officers to pay attention to the stragglers 2 kilometers away. Victor Moreau also received reports of Moroccans approaching Tamire. He looked at the messenger sent by Ney. "How far are your people from Tamire?" "More than 6 kilometers, Lieutenant." Victor Moreau frowned and thought for a moment, then asked, "I remember that there are 300 Tunisian soldiers in Tamire." "Yes, Lieutenant." Moreau nodded and said, "That's good. Order them to go forward to the west side of the town to set up a defense line and do their best to delay the Moroccans." "Yes." The messenger responded subconsciously, but immediately realized, "But, sir, you have no right to mobilize them. Just say it's General Schur's authorization. The document will be given to them after the battle. This don't delay, or Tamire will lose it." The messenger was excited, and he puffed up his chest and said, "Yes, Lieutenant." Looking at the back of the messenger urging the horse to leave, Victor Moreau's staff officer whispered, "Sir Lieutenant, you will go to the military court. As long as we can save Tamire, we will only get medals." Victor Moreau smiled, "And even if there is a problem, it will be Lieutenant Ney who goes to court-martial." The one who lied about getting the authorization from the general is his people. Sneezed loudly and rubbed his nose, but suddenly he heard what sounded like gunshots coming from the west, and his heart suddenly tightened. He looked at the formation that had been completely disrupted by the rapid march, and loudly ordered the team to reorganize on the spot and continue to advance in 4 rows. It was less than half a kilometer away from Tamiret, and the gunfire was probably from Moroccans looting the town. We will teach those infidels a profound lesson. Before he finished speaking, he heard a company commander who went to conduct reconnaissance report. Lieutenant, it's the Tunisian border guards who are fighting the Moroccans. But they seem to be unable to withstand it anymore. Eyes widened immediately. According to his guess, the hundreds of Tunisian soldiers should have escaped long ago. He had heard rumors about the Tunisian army in his country, saying that they couldn't even form a formation and were almost vulnerable. In fact, he didn't know that the Tunisian soldiers were used as elites by Lafayette in India. Quick, go to reinforce immediately. Shouted and took the 1st and 2nd companies, which had already been lined up, to Tamiret. 1/3 of the 2 companies were soldiers he brought from Serre, and their abilities were much stronger than others. Originally, he was going to take them to enroll in military academies. Civilians can go to military academies for free tuition, and accommodation and meals are also included, but Serre has no military academies, and those military academies in other places that accept civilians have passed the enrollment season. In the end, he decided to come to North Africa to develop at the suggestion of a relative who joined the Guards Corps. Along the way, many civilians who were planning to go to North Africa to fight learned that he was an officer and took the initiative to follow him. The team expanded to as many as 8 companies. The vanguard of the Moroccan Guards did not expect to encounter resistance at all. Their scout cavalry reported that the defenders of Tamiret had all left. So, when the Tunisian soldiers hiding outside Tamiret suddenly shot at them, they were temporarily in chaos. The Moroccan Guards, who were all black, quickly stabilized their position and launched a counterattack. However, just as they were beating more than 300 Tunisian soldiers back and almost collapsing, a slender line of soldiers in white uniforms appeared in their sight. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.